For thousands of years, the sands of Egypt have remained silent, protecting the secrets of one of the greatest and most fascinating civilizations in human history. Ancient Egypt, with its pharaohs, pyramids, sphinxes, and hieroglyphs, has always attracted the attention of researchers, adventurers, and dreamers. We admire their monumental architecture, which is striking in its precision and scale, their deep belief in the afterlife, their unique art and complex social structure. It would seem that thanks to the inexhaustible flow of archaeological discoveries and the deciphering of thousands of papyri, we know almost everything about them. But this is only an illusion of completeness. Beneath every layer of history revealed, behind every inscription read, behind every artifact recovered from the ground, lies an even deeper and more intriguing mystery. Ancient Egypt is not just a collection of historical facts. It is a puzzle whose parts are constantly changing, and some of them seem to be lost forever. How could a civilization that lacked iron and modern machines build pyramids that cost thousands of years, standing the test of time and the elements? What tools and methods did they use to treat the hardest stones with surgical precision? Why do some of their technologies, such as embalming secrets, seem unrepeatable even today? Where did their amazing astronomical knowledge come from, which allowed them to orient colossal structures by the stars with incredible accuracy? Did they have maps of the world that we don't know about, or secret societies that kept knowledge from the uninitiated? In this text, we will dive into the most inexplicable and controversial secrets of ancient Egypt. We will not limit ourselves to well-known facts, but will delve into poorly studied aspects, controversial hypotheses, and those questions to which modern science still cannot give exhaustive answers. From mysterious artifacts resembling flying machines to the unexplained disappearance of entire cultural strata, from potential traces of high technology to the phenomenon of the curse of the pharaohs. Each chapter will focus on a new facet of this ancient civilization, which continues to keep us in awe of new discoveries. These mysteries are not just curiosities. They challenge our understanding of the past, forcing us to rethink the limits of human capabilities, the nature of knowledge transfer, and what we consider the development of civilization. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians possessed wisdom and technology that we are just beginning to rediscover. Prepare for a journey into a world where history is intertwined with myths and science is confronted with the unfathomable. The whisper of eternity is calling us, promising to reveal secrets that have been waiting to be heard for millennia. The secret of building the Great Pyramids, missing blueprints and unfathomable methods. In the vast kaleidoscope of wonders of ancient Egypt, nothing excites the imagination and causes so much controversy as the Great Pyramids of Giza, especially the Pyramid of Cheops. Towering over a desert plateau, these colossal structures represent the peak of the engineering and architectural genius of the ancient Egyptians, but paradoxically remain one of their deepest and most unsolved mysteries. The question is not just how they were built, but why a civilization that could move and process millions of tons of stone with such amazing accuracy did not leave behind a single detailed drawing, no engineering treatise, or even a clear description of the construction process itself. This lack of documentation, coupled with the seeming anachronism of technology for that period, forces us to look for answers beyond orthodox explanations. The main puzzle revolves around the methods of moving and lifting millions of limestone and granite blocks. The Pyramid of Cheops consists of approximately 2.3 million blocks, with an average weight of about 2.5 tons, and some granite blocks in the burial chambers weigh up to 70 or 80 tons. Official Egyptology offers a theory of ramps, external or internal, straight or spiral. However, each of these options faces huge logistical and physical challenges. A straight ramp to reach the top of the pyramid, 146 meters with a reasonable slope, 7 or 8 degrees, would have to be several kilometers long, which would make its volume larger than the pyramid itself and would require enormous construction and dismantling efforts. A spiral ramp around the pyramid would solve the problem of length, but it would create unsolvable difficulties with lifting and turning multi-ton blocks on narrow, steep bends, as well as with controlling the accuracy of the angles of the pyramid itself, which would be hidden under the structure. The internal ramp proposed by Jean-Pierre Houdin explains the absence of external tracks, but still requires an explanation of how blocks weighing tens of tons were lifted through narrow and dark internal tunnels. Critics of all these theories point to the complete lack of archaeological evidence for the existence of such large-scale ramps. Where are their remnants? Why are there no traces of grandiose earthworks that would have preceded such structures? This leads many to question their applicability on such a large scale. In addition to moving, the mystery of the incredible precision of stone processing and block fitting remains. Millions of blocks were fitted together with a gap of less than a millimeter, especially the facing blocks, which were lost. How was this achieved using copper and stone tools that were not supposed to have sufficient hardness to handle limestone and granite with such precision? The hypotheses about the use of dolerite balls for impact treatment and abrasive sand for polishing seem too primitive to achieve such a high degree of uniformity and flatness in large areas. Traces on some blocks look as if they were made by high-precision mechanisms and not by hand tools. Some researchers suggest that the Egyptians may have possessed some lost technology, possibly related to the internet, using sound vibrations to soften stone or high-precision cutting tools that we don't know anything about. These are speculations, of course, but they arise from a lack of convincing traditional explanations. Finally, the very mathematical and astronomical precision of the pyramids remains unexplained. The Pyramid of Cheops is oriented to the cardinal directions with a deviation of only 3 angular minutes, which is amazing even for modern construction. Its proportions, according to some researchers, include such mathematical constants as the number pi, POE, and the golden ratio, pH. How could the ancient Egyptians have achieved such precision without modern geodetic instruments, compasses, and a sophisticated mathematical system that allowed them to operate with such abstract concepts? All of this together creates a puzzle that not only highlights the genius of the ancient Egyptians, but also challenges our current understanding of their technological level, leaving the door open to the most daring theories. Did they have the knowledge that we had lost? Or do we simply underestimate the limits of human capabilities, even with primitive tools and incredible organization of work? This mystery continues to inspire generations of researchers to search for answers in the sands of time. The secret of the Saqqara Serapeum, monolithic sarcophagi, and unknown tools. Beneath the shifting sands of the ancient Saqqara necropolis, southwest of Cairo, lies one of the most impressive yet inexplicable structures of ancient Egypt, the Serapeum. This vast underground complex, discovered by Auguste Mariette in 1850, is a maze of tunnels and galleries cut into the solid rock and served as the burial site of the sacred Apis bulls, the incarnations of the god Ptah. However, it is not so much the fact of animal burial that is surprising, as the colossal scale and amazing precision of the sarcophagi in which these bulls were buried, which makes us think about the use of technologies that go far beyond the traditional ideas about ancient Egypt. Inside the Serapeum are 24 huge sarcophagi carved from monolithic blocks of granite, diorite, and basalt, some of the hardest rocks on Earth. Each of these sarcophagi weighs between 70 and 100 tons, and their lids add about 30 tons more, making the total mass of one burial up to 130 tons. The sarcophagi themselves have strikingly smooth, perfectly flat inner and outer surfaces, and their corners are chiseled with such incredible precision, with deviations of a fraction of a millimeter, that it seems as if they are the work of modern equipment and not tools of the Bronze Age. Traditional Egyptology involves the use of percussion instruments made of dolerite, a very hard rock, as well as abrasive materials such as quartz sand and water for grinding. However, to achieve such high accuracy on such hard rocks and such huge areas by manual methods would require an incredible amount of labor and time, which raises serious doubts among engineers, geologists, and stonemasons. The absence of obvious traces of percussion instruments on perfectly polished surfaces, as well as the presence of some furrows that seem too smooth and uniform for manual work, only reinforces this mystery. Some researchers suggest that the ancient Egyptians may have used some form of rotary tools with very hard drills or discs running at high speeds, which could have provided such a clean and precise cut, which is not consistent with the lack of complex mechanisms such as gears or motors. In addition to the manufacturing methods, there is also the mystery of transportation and installation, these colossal sarcophagi, into the underground tunnels. The Serapeum is located at a considerable distance from the main granite quarries, such as Aswan. How were these 100-ton blocks moved for hundreds of kilometers, then lowered into narrow, dark underground galleries and precisely installed in their places? It is assumed that wooden sleds, levers, and ramp systems were used, but in the conditions of underground labyrinths, where the space for maneuver is extremely limited, this would be a task of incredible, almost impossible complexity. Some tunnels are so narrow that they leave almost no room to move such massive objects. The absence of any soot on the walls or ceilings from torches also adds mystery to the question of lighting these underground works. How could workers effectively work in total darkness without enough light? This suggests the existence of unknown light sources that did not leave traces of combustion. Finally, the very meaning of creating such excessively large and complex sarcophagi for bulls raises deep questions. Why were burial chambers created for sacred animals that surpass many royal tombs designed for pharaohs in scale and quality of manufacture? This may indicate an incredible degree of reverence for these animals and their divine essence, but it may also hint at a deeper, perhaps cosmic, energetic, or astronomical meaning of these structures that we have yet to understand. Some theories suggest that the sarcophagi may have served not only for burial, but also for some other, now unknown purposes, perhaps energy storage or resonators, given the unique properties of granite and its piezoelectric characteristics. The Serapeum, with its giant, strikingly accurate sarcophagi, continues to be one of the most intriguing places in Egypt, demonstrating the engineering and technological abilities of the ancient Egyptians that seem to go beyond the usual understanding, leaving a trail of unresolved questions and fueling hypotheses about lost technologies or even the influence of more advanced civilizations. The secret of Tutankhamun's golden sarcophagus, sources of metal and unfathomable processing technologies. Among the most dazzling treasures ever found in Egypt, the golden sarcophagus and burial mask of Tutankhamun occupy a special place, symbolizing the untold riches and supreme craftsmanship of the ancient Egyptians. The discovery of the tomb of the Pharaoh Boy by Howard Carter in 1922 shocked the world with the abundance of gold used to create burial equipment. Tutankhamun's inner sarcophagus alone weighs more than 110 kilograms of pure gold, while the famous mask weighs more than 10 kilograms inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, and quartz. These findings, as well as references in ancient texts to the gold of Nubia and the abundance of this precious metal, raise one of the most fundamental and still not fully explained mysteries. Where did the ancient Egyptians get such a huge amount of gold over the millennia? Where were their main deposits, and what mining and processing technologies allowed them to do this? Are they able to extract and refine this metal to such a degree of perfection that they do not have access to modern chemical processes and equipment? Most of the famous gold mines of ancient Egypt were located in the eastern desert, and especially in Nubia, modern Sudan. The Nubia region even gets its name from the ancient Egyptian word nub, meaning gold, which highlights its key role. Ancient maps such as the famous Turin Papyrus, the oldest known geological map in the world, depict gold mines, roads to them, and even workers' homes. However, despite this information, many of these mines today either seem exhausted or their scale, according to modern estimates, does not correspond to the colossal volumes of gold that were extracted and used for more than 2,000 years of dynastic Egypt. This forces archaeologists and geologists to search for additional deposits that have not yet been discovered. Did the Egyptians have other now forgotten sources of gold, perhaps located in even more remote and inaccessible regions of Africa, where their expeditions could reach by land or sea? Or did they have unique, now lost methods that allowed them to extract gold from deposits that are considered unprofitable or too labor-intensive by modern technologies? The main technological conundrum is related to the methods of gold mining. The Egyptians used both alluvial mining, washing gold sand and gravel from river sediments, and mine mining, extraction of gold from quartz veins and hard rocks. Alluvial mining, while effective for easily accessible surface deposits, quickly depletes them. Mining, on the other hand, required much more effort and advanced techniques for that time. How could the ancient Egyptians, without iron tools, iron became widely used much later, penetrate deep into hard rocks and grind quartz veins to extract the smallest particles of gold? Using copper chisels and hammers that blunt quickly, as well as the supposedly fire-splitting method, heating the rock and then abruptly cooling it with water to create cracks, the process would be incredibly time-consuming, slow, and dangerous. The crushed rock was then washed with water to separate the heavier gold particles. But how did they provide so much water in the arid conditions of desert mines? Have complex water supply systems, channels, or catchments been used that are unknown to us or have not yet been discovered? Evidence about the working conditions in these mines left by Greek historians such as Diodorus Siculus describes them as hellish places where tens of thousands of slaves and convicts, including women and children, died en masse from exhaustion, heat, starvation, and lack of hygiene. This fact may explain why many mines were quickly abandoned after the surface deposits were depleted, and why the Egyptians were constantly in need of new sources of labor and gold. In addition to mining, there is a question about the methods of refining gold. To create such artifacts as the golden sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, extremely high-quality gold was required, almost pure. How could the Egyptians have achieved such purity without complex chemical processes, such as lead cupping, although lead was used, but its role in refining is not fully understood, or aqua regium, which were invented much later? They may have used simpler but extremely effective methods based on deep knowledge of the properties of metals and various minerals that we haven't fully reconstructed yet. For example, ancient methods may have involved repeatedly heating gold with various salts, such as sodium chloride or alum, to bind and remove impurities. However, the scale of production and the quality of the final product remain impressive and difficult to explain without assuming a well-developed empirical knowledge of metal chemistry. Finally, the mystery of the golden sarcophagus. This is also the secret of managing this huge resource in the entire mining industry. How did the pharaohs control such a vast and dangerous sphere? How did they provide labor, food, water, and tools for thousands of workers in remote desert areas? Gold was an absolute monopoly of the pharaoh, and its extraction, processing, and distribution were strictly controlled by the state. It was a complex logistical and administrative system, the details of which we know only fragmentary from rare papyri and inscriptions. The mystery of gold deposits and mining technologies in ancient Egypt remains one of the biggest gaps in our understanding of this civilization. It hints at the presence of lost knowledge, more effective methods than we realize, and perhaps the existence of hidden sources that are still waiting to be discovered in the depths of the desert, waiting for new technologies to allow us to uncover all their secrets and fully appreciate the true wealth and technological achievements of ancient Egypt. The secret of ancient Egyptian medicine and surgery, lost knowledge and unexplained success. Ancient Egypt, with its rich culture and deep knowledge in many areas, also left behind an amazing legacy in the field of medicine and surgery. Numerous medical papyri, such as the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most complete medical texts, and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, dedicated to surgery and trauma, attest to an astounding level of medical knowledge that was far ahead of its time. The Egyptians knew about blood circulation, were able to diagnose many diseases, perform complex surgical operations, and created unique medicines. However, despite the abundance of these records, many aspects of their medical practices remain unexplained, giving rise to mysteries about how they achieved such success, why some of their knowledge seems lost, and what components of their medicines provided such effectiveness. The main mystery lies in the effectiveness of their medicines and treatment methods. The Ebers Papyrus contains hundreds of recipes for treating diseases ranging from eye infections and toothache to heart disease and cancer. These recipes include a wide range of ingredients: plant extracts such as plant leaves and bark, minerals, copper, lead, ochre, and animal products. Although some of these ingredients are now known for their medicinal properties, many others seem exotic or even downright strange, such as animal feces. However, judging by the survival rate and relatively good health of many mummies, as well as the descriptions of successful treatment outcomes, their medications were quite effective. How could the Egyptians, without modern pharmacology and microscopes, determine the correct dosages, combinations of ingredients, and preparation methods to achieve such a therapeutic effect? Perhaps they had deep empirical knowledge accumulated over millennia of observations and experiments that were passed down from generation to generation. But did they have any special unknown ingredients or processing methods that made their drugs so powerful? Or was it the result of a complex approach involving not only pharmacology, but also diet, hygiene, and magical rituals that we cannot fully understand? Another intriguing mystery is related to the level of ancient Egyptian surgery. The Edwin Smith papyrus, which dates from around 1600 BC, but is a copy of an older text, contains 48 cases of injuries and their treatment, ranging from fractures of the skull and spine to wounds and tumors. This papyrus describes in detail diagnostic methods, such as palpation, and breath monitoring, treatment methods including suturing, bandaging, and splinting to fix fractures, and even predicting outcomes. The operations described in the papyrus, such as cranial trepanation, evidence of which was found on ancient skulls, the installation of prosthetics, albeit primitive, and even possibly eye operations are striking in their complexity. How could Egyptian surgeons perform such complex procedures without anesthesia in the modern world, AI and primitive tools made of copper and stone? Although they probably used opium, belladonna, or mandrake for pain relief, this does not explain the accuracy of the operations. Using clean, sharp tools would be critical to preventing infections, but their copper tools couldn't stay sharp for long. It is possible that they used some unknown methods of sterilization or disinfection, which helped in the fight against infections, which were the main cause of death in those days. Some mummies show evidence of successful surgeries, including fusing fractures and even removing tumors, indicating a high percentage of successful outcomes. The mystery also concerns the specialization of ancient Egyptian doctors. It is known from the text that there were various specializations: oculists, dentists, gastroenterologists, as well as overseers of doctors. This indicates a well-developed system of medical education and professionalization. But how did this training take place? Did knowledge pass through family dynasties, or did specialized schools exist? The lack of detailed textbooks on anatomy or physiology, despite the deep knowledge of the body, also raises questions. Perhaps most of the knowledge was passed on practically through observation and experience. Finally, there is the question of lost knowledge. With the decline of Egyptian civilization, many of these advanced medical practices appear to have been lost or degraded. The Greeks and Romans learned a lot from the Egyptians, but not all of it. Why is such a well-developed knowledge system not fully preserved for students? Perhaps this was due to the loss of knowledge carriers, priests, doctors, the destruction of libraries, or a change in cultural priorities. The mystery of ancient Egyptian medicines and surgery is not just an archaeological curiosity. It is a reminder that the ancient Egyptians were able to find a way out of Egypt. Civilizations may have possessed knowledge and skills that we are just beginning to rediscover, and that many of their secrets may have been buried forever with their creators. The mystery of the unfinished obelisk. Evidence of a disaster or an excess of capacity? In the heart of the granite quarries of Aswan, in southern Egypt, lies one of the most striking and unsolved evidences of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship: an unfinished obelisk. This colossal monolith, carved directly from the mother rock, remained unfinished, forever chained to its stone bed. Its grandiose size, as well as the obvious signs of a sudden work stoppage, raise many questions about the techniques of the ancient stonemasons, the reasons why such a huge project was abandoned, and, most intriguingly, whether this unfinished obelisk was evidence of the limits of their capabilities or even some catastrophe that befell the workers. The main mystery of the unfinished obelisk is its gigantic size and weight. Had it been completed, it would have been about 42 meters long and estimated to weigh more than 1,200 tons, the largest monolithic obelisk ever carved, far surpassing in mass any obelisk currently in existence or known from history. By comparison, The largest of the obelisks delivered and installed, the Lateran obelisk in Rome, weighs about 455 tons. Imagine an engineering challenge. Carve such a huge block of solid rock, then separate it from the base, turn it over and transport it hundreds of kilometers down the Nile, and then lift it up and install it vertically. This would be a task that would still be very difficult even today, with the use of state-of-the-art cranes and heavy machinery. The question is, how did the Egyptians even plan to do this, given their copper, dolerite, and stone tools? The lack of detailed written sources describing the process of mining and transporting obelisks of this scale only adds to the mystery. Another deep mystery is the technology of stone carving and processing. Around the unfinished obelisk, you can see numerous depressions and furrows left by the workers. Tools. It is believed that to separate the monolith from the rock, dolerite balls were used, hard round stones that workers beat on the surface, gradually destroying the rock, as well as possibly copper tools. However, to carve such a huge object with such geometric precision required an incredible amount of work and time. It is estimated that thousands of workers would have been required to complete the obelisk, probably lasting more than a year. How did they maintain the flatness of the surface and the parallelism of the sides throughout the entire length of the obelisk? Working in such conditions? The lack of visible evidence of water being used to widen the crevices by driving wooden wedges that widened and broke the rock when wet also adds to the intrigue. They may have used other, less obvious methods of splitting, but the biggest mystery is the reason why the project was abandoned. The obelisk clearly shows a huge crack running along its entire length. This indicates that at some point, when the obelisk was almost completely carved and ready to be detached, it split open, rendering it unusable. But what caused this crack? Was it a natural weakness in the granite vein itself that only showed up in the later stages of the work? Or was it an error in calculations, an incorrect application of force when trying to separate it? Or perhaps an impact caused by an earthquake or a sudden collapse of part of the quarry? The fact that the obelisk remained in place indicates that its repair was impossible and that the loss of such colossal labor was too great. This was certainly a huge disappointment for Pharaoh, who commissioned it, and for the engineers who led the project. Finally, the unfinished obelisk challenges our understanding of the limits of the ancient Egyptians' capabilities. Was this crack an accident, or was it evidence that they had reached the limit of their technological capabilities and perhaps their methods, which were effective for smaller monoliths, were not applicable for such gigantic dimensions? Or was it a lesson they learned for future projects? The mystery of the unfinished obelisk is not just an archaeological site. It is a silent witness to the grandiose ambitions, astounding craftsmanship, and perhaps bitter failures of the ancient Egyptian builders. It will always remain a question to their genius, reminding them that even the greatest civilizations face unsolvable problems, and that their history is full of not only triumphs, but also mysterious, unfinished beginnings. The mystery of gold masks and sarcophagi, the origin of gold and the mysteries of its processing. Among the most dazzling treasures ever found in Egypt, golden sarcophagi and funerary masks are the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian jewelry art and a symbol of untold riches. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter forever established in the public mind the image of Egypt as the land of gold. In the famous inner sarcophagus of the pharaoh, weighing more than 110 kilograms of pure gold, and his death mask encrusted with precious stones, became icons of this civilization. These findings, as well as references in ancient texts to the gold of Nubia and the constant influx of the precious metal, raise one of the most fundamental and still not fully explained mysteries. Where did the ancient Egyptians get such a colossal amount of gold for thousands of years? Where were their main deposits, and what mining and processing technologies allowed? Are they able to extract and refine this metal to such a degree of perfection that they do not have access to modern chemical processes and equipment? Most of the famous gold mines of ancient Egypt were located in the eastern desert, and especially in Nubia, modern Sudan, a region that itself takes its name from the ancient Egyptian word nub, meaning gold, which emphasizes its key role in the Egyptian economy. Ancient maps, such as the famous Turin papyrus, the oldest known geological map in the world, depict gold mines, roads to them, and even workers and homes. However, despite this detailed, if sketchy, information, many of these mines today either seem exhausted to such an extent that they cannot explain the volume of gold produced, or their scale, according to modern estimates, does not correspond to the enormous reserves that were extracted and used for more than 2,000 years of dynastic Egypt. This forces archaeologists and geologists to search for additional deposits that have not yet been discovered. Did the Egyptians have other now forgotten sources of gold, perhaps located in even more remote and inaccessible regions of Africa, where their expeditions could reach by land or sea? Or did they have unique, now lost methods that allowed them to extract gold from deposits that are considered unprofitable or too labor-intensive by modern technologies? The question of the amount of labor required for such large-scale mining and its supply in harsh desert conditions also remains open. The main technological conundrum is related to the methods of gold mining. The Egyptians used both alluvial mining, washing gold, sand, and gravel from river sediments, and mine mining, extraction of gold from quartz veins in hard rocks. Alluvial mining, while effective for easily accessible surface deposits, quickly depletes them. Mining, on the other hand, required much more effort, specialized skills, and advanced technology at the time. How could the ancient Egyptians, without iron tools — iron became widely used much later, in the late New Kingdom and later periods — have penetrated deep into solid rock and crushed quartz veins to extract the smallest particles of gold? Using primitive copper chisels and hammers that quickly blunted and deformed, as well as, presumably, the method of fire splitting, heating the rock to a high temperature and then sharply cooling it with water to create cracks, the process would be incredibly time-consuming, slow, and dangerous. The crushed rock was then washed with water on inclined surfaces to separate the heavier gold particles. But how did they provide so much water in the arid conditions of desert mines, many of which were located far from the Nile? Have complex water supply systems, channels, wells, or catchments been used that are unknown to us or have not yet been discovered? Evidence of the working conditions in these ruins, left by Greek historians such as Diodorus Siculus, describes them as hellish places where tens of thousands of slaves and convicts, including women and children, died en masse from exhaustion, heat, starvation, and lack of hygiene. This fact may explain why many mines were quickly abandoned after the surface deposits were depleted, and why the Egyptians were constantly in need of new sources of labor and gold. In addition to mining, there is a question about the methods of refining gold. To create such artifacts as the golden sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, extremely high-quality gold was required, almost pure. How could the Egyptians have achieved such purity without complex chemical processes, such as lead cupping, which, although known in ancient times, its detailed use in Egypt for gold is not fully understood, or aqua regium, a mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acids that can dissolve gold, which were invented much later? They may have used more simple but extremely effective methods, based on a deep knowledge of the properties of metals and various minerals that we have not yet fully reconstructed. For example, ancient methods may have involved repeatedly heating gold with various salts, such as sodium chloride or alum, which would have allowed it to bind and remove impurities through a process called cementation gilding, or by prolonged firing in special furnaces. However, the scale of production and the quality of the final product remain impressive and difficult to explain without assuming a well-developed empirical knowledge of metal chemistry and metallurgy. Finally, the mystery of the golden masks and sarcophagi. This is also the secret of managing this huge resource in the entire mining industry. How did the pharaohs control such a vast and dangerous sphere, given the remoteness of the mines and logistical difficulties? How did they provide labor, food, water, and tools for thousands of workers in remote desert areas? Gold was an absolute monopoly of the pharaoh, and its extraction, processing, storage, and distribution were strictly controlled by the state through a complex bureaucratic and administrative system, the details of which we know only fragmentary from rare papyri and inscriptions. The mystery of gold deposits and mining techniques in ancient Egypt remains one of the biggest gaps in our understanding of this civilization. It hints at the presence of lost knowledge, more effective methods than we realize, and perhaps the existence of hidden sources that are still waiting to be discovered in the depths of the desert, waiting for new technologies to allow us to uncover all their secrets and fully appreciate the true wealth and technological achievements of ancient Egypt. This mystery continues to inspire geologists and archaeologists to embark on new expeditions to find the invisible threads that linked royal luxury to the brutal reality of desert mines. The secret of ancient Egyptian medicine and surgery. Lost knowledge and unexplained success. Ancient Egypt, with its rich culture and deep knowledge in many areas, also left behind an amazing legacy in the field of medicine and surgery. Numerous medical papyri, such as the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most complete medical texts, dating from about 1550 BC, but containing references to even earlier knowledge, and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, dedicated to surgery and traumatology, dating from about 1600 BC, but being a copy of the text from the ancient kingdom. This is a remarkable level of medical knowledge that was far ahead of its time and even medieval practices. The Egyptians had extensive knowledge of anatomy, although not always accurate due to religious prohibitions on autopsies, knew about blood circulation, although they did not understand its pumping function of the heart, were able to diagnose many diseases, performed salivary surgeries, created unique medicines, and developed a well-developed healthcare system. However, despite the abundance of these records and archaeological evidence, many aspects of their medical practices remain unexplained, giving rise to mysteries about how they achieved such success, why some of their knowledge seems lost, and what components of their medicines provided such effectiveness. The main mystery lies in the effectiveness of their medicines and treatment methods. The Ebers Papyrus contains hundreds of recipes for treating various diseases and conditions, from eye infections and toothache to heart disease, digestive problems, and even mentions of certain forms of cancer or tumors. These recipes include a wide range of ingredients, plant extracts such as leaves, roots, fruits, seeds of many plants, such as dates, onions, garlic, poppy seeds, aloe, minerals, copper, lead, ochre, salt, soda, and animal products, honey, milk, fats, blood, animal excrement s. While many of these ingredients are now known for their medicinal, antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, or analgesic properties, many others seem exotic, irrational, or even downright strange, suchas using mouse droppings or lizard blood. However, judging by the survival and relatively good health of many mummies, who, despite their pathologies, lived to an advanced age, as well as by the descriptions of successful treatment outcomes in papyri, their drugs were generally effective. How could the Egyptians, without modern pharmacology, chemical analysis, and microscopes, determine the correct dosages, combinations of ingredients, extraction methods, and preparation methods, for example, decoctions, ointments, poultices, in order to achieve such a precise therapeutic effect? They may have had deep empirical knowledge accumulated over millennia of observations and experiments that were passed down from generation to generation in schools or temple centers. But did they have any special unknown ingredients or processing methods that made their drugs so powerful? Or was it the result of an integrated approach that included not only pharmacology, but also diet, hygiene, magical rituals, spells, and incantations, which for them were inseparable from the healing process, and which we cannot fully understand from our modern rational point of view? Another intriguing mystery is related to the level of ancient Egyptian surgery. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, written in the form of a textbook or manual of traumatology, contains 48 cases of injuries and their treatment, ranging from fractures of the skull and spine to wounds, abscesses, and tumors. This papyrus describes in detail diagnostic methods such as palpation, breath monitoring, pulse measurement, treatment methods including suturing, bandaging, splints for fixing fractures, drainage of abscesses, and even predicting outcomes. The disease I will treat, the disease I will treat, I will challenge. A disease that I will not treat. The operations described in the papyrus, such as cranial trepanation, evidence of which, with signs of bone healing, has been found on ancient skulls, the installation of prosthetics, albeit primitive ones, such as wooden fingers, and even possibly eye surgery or cataract removal, are striking in their complexity. How could Egyptian surgeons perform such complex procedures without anesthesia in the modern sense, and with primitive instruments made of copper, bronze, and stone? Although they probably used natural painkillers such as opium, belladonna, or mandrake, this does not explain the accuracy of the operations. The use of clean, sharp instruments would have been critical to prevent infections, but their copper and bronze instruments quickly blunted and could not be completely sterile. Perhaps they used some unknown methods of sterilization or disinfection, for example, washing wounds with honey, which is a natural antiseptic, or wine, which helped in the fight against infections, which were the main cause of death in those days. Some mummies show evidence of successful surgeries, including the fusion of complex fractures and even the removal of tumors, indicating surprisingly high success rate. The mystery also concerns the specialization of ancient Egyptian doctors and their training system. It is known from the text that there were various medical specializations: oculists, dentists, gastroenterologists, veterinarians, as well as overseers of doctors and chief doctors of the South and North. This indicates a well-developed system of medical education and professionalization, probably organized at the temples. But how did this training take place? Was knowledge passed down through family dynasties? Or were there specialized schools, houses of life, attached to temples where students studied anatomy, pharmacology, and medicine? Surgery? The lack of detailed textbooks on anatomy or physiology, with the exception of general descriptions of organs in papyri, despite the deep knowledge of the body, also raises questions. Perhaps most of the knowledge was passed on practically through observation, mentoring, and experience, rather than through formal treatises. Finally, there is the question of lost knowledge. With the decline of Egyptian civilization, political upheaval, and changing cultural dominance, Greco-Roman and later Arab influence, many of these advanced medical practices seem to have been lost or degraded. Although the Greeks and Romans learned much from the Egyptians, not all knowledge was fully assimilated or preserved. Why has such a developed system of knowledge not been fully preserved for posterity, leaving gaps in the historical continuity of medical progress? This may have been due to the loss of knowledge carriers, priests, doctors who were the keepers of these secrets, the destruction of temple libraries, or a change in cultural and religious priorities that no longer valued ancient methods. The mystery of ancient Egyptian medicines and surgery is not just an archaeological curiosity. It is a reminder that ancient civilizations may have possessed knowledge and skills that we are just beginning to rediscover, and that many of their secrets may have been buried forever with their creators, prompting us to further research and rethink the evolution of medical knowledge. The secret of ancient Egyptian mirrors and high-precision surfaces. Mastery without modern tools. The ancient Egyptians, known for their amazing skill in working with stone and metal, left behind many artifacts that demonstrate the incredible smoothness and precision of surfaces. Among them, mirrors made of polished metal, bronze or copper, and high-precision surfaces of stone objects, such as sarcophagi in the Serapeum. Granite blocks of pyramids and obelisks stand out. The ability of Egyptians to achieve this level of polishing and flatness without access to modern measuring instruments, grinders, and diamond or silicon carbide-based abrasive remains one of the most intriguing technological mysteries. How did they create surfaces that sometimes exceed the precision of some modern products? The main mystery concerns the methods of polishing and grinding metal mirrors. Ancient Egyptian mirrors, most often round in shape with a handle, were made of copper or bronze alloys and were polished to such a shine that they could give a clear reflection. To achieve such a high degree of reflectivity, the metal surface must be not just smooth, but almost perfectly smooth at the microscopic level, without scratches and irregularities. It is assumed that the Egyptians used abrasive paste consisting of fine sand, pumice stone, or red ochre powder, mixed with cotton wool or oil. Then, using soft materials such as leather, wood, or fabric, they polished the surface. However, to achieve such perfection, the process would require extreme precision and patience, and possibly the use of a multi-stage abrasive system with a gradually decreasing particle size. How did they test the quality of polishing at a microscopic level without magnifying glasses? Could it be that they possessed some secret composition or polishing technology that allowed them to achieve such results faster and more efficiently than we can imagine? The lack of detailed written sources or instructions for making mirrors leaves this process largely hypothetical. An even deeper mystery concerns the polishing and perfect flatness of surfaces on massive stone objects. Sarcophagi in the Serapeum, which we have already discussed, as well as the inner surfaces of burial chambers in the pyramids, granite-facing blocks, and even some sculptures, show a striking smoothness and precision of angles. Measurements show that deviations from the ideal plane on some granite surfaces are only fractions of a millimeter, which is an incredible achievement for that time. Working with granite, diorite, and basalt, extremely hard rocks would require tools capable of working them. Although it is believed that the Egyptians used dolerite balls for impact processing and quartz sand as an abrasive, achieving such accuracy with these methods alone seems almost impossible. The process would be extremely long and time-consuming, and there would be a high risk of scratches or bumps. Some researchers suggest that the Egyptians may have used some form of rotating or oscillating instruments, with hard abrasive discs or rods that could provide such a high degree of precision in polishing. However, such tools would require mechanisms capable of generating high rotational speeds or vibrations, which is also inconsistent with the absence of visible traces of complex mechanisms, such as gears or motors, and the materials used to create them. The conundrum also concerns tools for measuring and controlling quality. How did the ancient masters ensure such precision of angles and flatness on huge surfaces? They probably used plumb lines, squares, and measuring cords. But to check perfect evenness, very precise rulers would be required, and perhaps also the use of lapping techniques, the sequential grinding of two surfaces against each other with an abrasive to achieve maximum fit. These methods are known, but their application on such scales as the surfaces of 100-ton sarcophagi seems out of the question. Perhaps the Egyptians had some lost method of calibration or precise reconciliation that allowed them to achieve such results. The mystery of ancient Egyptian mirrors and high-precision surfaces is not just a question of craft. It is a question of the possible presence of lost technological knowledge in materials science, mechanics, and metrology. It forces us to rethink the limits of what was possible in the ancient world and continues to inspire us to find hidden secrets in these perfectly polished stones and metals that still retain their mysterious smoothness. The mystery of sunken cities, Heraklion and Canopus, the lost gateway to Egypt and their inexplicable demise. Beneath the azure waters of the Mediterranean Sea, off the northern coast of Egypt, are not just shipwrecks or random ruins, but entire sunken cities that were once thriving ports, centers of trade, religious life, and cultural exchange that played a key role in contacts between Egypt and the rest of the ancient world. Among them, a special place is occupied by the legendary cities of Heraklion, known to the Egyptians as Thonis, and Canopus, whose ruins, which went underwater more than 1,000 years ago, were discovered only at the very beginning of the 21st century, in the 2000s, by an expedition led by French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio. These monumental finds completely changed our understanding of the geography, trade routes, and cultural connections of the Nile Delta in the late dynastic, from the 7th century BC and early Ptolemaic periods, but at the same time gave rise to many new unsolved mysteries about the exact causes of their death, the speed of their loading, the ancient location of the coastlines, and those priceless treasures that they still hide under the seafloor. The main and most acute mystery of sunken cities is the unexpected and catastrophic causes of their sinking underwater. Heraklion and Canopus flourished for many centuries, being the main seagate of Egypt for all who came from Greece, Asia Minor, and other regions of the Mediterranean. Ancient authors such as Herodotus, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus describe them as bustling, crowded, and rich ports with majestic temples, extensive docks, and thriving trade, where Egyptian and Greek cultures were actively mixed. However, around the 8th century AD, they gradually or suddenly disappeared under the waters, and their exact location was lost to history for more than 1,000 years, becoming the subject of myths and legends. The main hypothesis about the causes of their death is the complex impact of natural factors: strong earthquakes, devastating tsunamis, and most importantly, the phenomenon of soil liquefaction. The Nile Delta, which consists of loose alluvial deposits, silt and sand brought by the river, is subject to natural subsidence. Powerful earthquakes that often shook the eastern Mediterranean could have caused the effect of soil liquefaction, a process in which water-saturated sands and silts lose their hardness and bearing capacity under the influence of seismic waves, turning into a kind of liquid state which leads to rapid subsidence and sinking of massive buildings and structures. Persistent flooding from Nile floods and changes in the riverbed may also have contributed to shoreline erosion and landscape changes. However, the exact dates and sequence of these catastrophic events that led to their complete flooding are still not fully understood. Was it one colossal sudden event that caused cities to sink underwater in a matter of hours or days? Or was it a slow, centuries-old process of gradual subsidence, compounded by periodic storms and earthquakes? How would people leave these cities, and why haven't there been large-scale attempts to save valuable artifacts or rebuild cities on more stable ground? Another intriguing mystery is an incredible wealth and variety of artifacts found underwater. Hundreds of thousands of items were recovered from the depths of the sea: gold coins that indicate a lively trade, fine jewelry, giant granite statues of pharaohs, gods, and queens. Some of them reach 6 meters in height and weigh tens of tons. For example, the statue of the god Hapi, a symbol of the Nile flood, which is amazing in its size and preservation. There are numerous stelae with important decrees and inscriptions in Egyptian and Greek, as well as many everyday objects that give us invaluable information about the trade, cultural exchange, and religious life of these cities. For example, in Heraklion, the ruins of the Grand Temple of Amun-Gareb, sacred boats designed for solemn processions along the canals, and thousands of ancient Greek and Egyptian inscriptions attesting to the close interaction of the two cultures were found. Why did so many valuable and cumbersome artifacts, including huge statues and temple equipment, remain in the cities if the inhabitants knew about the impending catastrophe or had time for evacuation? Perhaps the dive happened quickly enough, leaving no time to save all the property. Or many of these items were ritually placed in temples and, according to beliefs, could not be removed or moved, remaining in their place until the end. The mystery of sunken cities is also linked to their strategic and cultural significance. Heraklion was not just a port, but an important border and customs point where all ships arriving from overseas had to first pass inspection and pay taxes. It was a kind of gateway to Egypt, which made it extremely important for the pharaohs and later for the Ptolemies, who controlled maritime trade. Canopus was famous for its temples dedicated to Osiris and Serapis, a syncretic Greek-Egyptian god, and was a center of religious pilgrimages, as well as a popular resort with canals and thermal baths. Their disappearance underwater not only wiped them off the map, but also changed the logistics, economy, and religious geography of the region, redirecting trade flows and pilgrimage routes. How did these cities function as centers of mixed cultures? Egyptian, Greek, and then Roman. How did the inhabitants of these cosmopolitan centers interact with each other on a daily level? And how did their beliefs, languages, and customs merge and transform to create a unique hybrid cultural landscape? Sunken cities with their beautifully preserved ruins and thousands of artifacts continue to be one of the most exciting destinations in underwater archaeology. They offer a unique insight into a world that has been lost for thousands of years and open up new pages about the trade routes, cultural exchange, and geological instability of ancient Egypt, continuing to amaze with their discoveries and challenge our understanding of its ancient geography and history, as well as the resilience and vulnerability of civilizations to the forces of nature. The secret of ancient Egyptian mummies, secrets of embalming and inexplicable preservation. The mummies of ancient Egypt, with their bodies preserved for centuries, are one of the most recognizable and eerie symbols of this civilization. The practice of embalming, which began in the pre-dynastic period and reached its peak in the New Kingdom, was a cornerstone of Egyptian belief in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that to ensure eternal life, the soul, Ba, and personality, K, must have a physical body to return to. However, despite detailed descriptions of the embalming process by ancient authors, such as Herodotus, and modern scientific studies of mummies, many aspects of this practice remain a deep and unexplained mystery. The main question is, how did the Egyptians, without modern knowledge of microbiology and chemistry, develop and improve methods to preserve human bodies for thousands of years, preventing decomposition? And why did some mummies survive much better than others, defying the logic of their own time? The main mystery lies in the exact chemical composition and properties of natron, a key substance used to dehydrate the body. Natron is a natural salt mixture consisting mainly of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and sodium sulfate, which was extracted from wadis, dried riverbeds, such as Wadi Natrun. The Egyptians immersed the body in natron for 40-70 days to completely remove the moisture that is the main cause of decomposition. However, how did they empirically determine the optimal exposure time and exact salt proportions in natron for different tissue types? An overabundance or lack of natron could lead to tissue destruction or incomplete dehydration. In addition, it remains unclear exactly how natron affected the bacteria that caused decomposition. It probably created an unfavorable environment for their growth, but without an understanding of microbiology, this would be a purely empirical discovery based on thousands of years of experience. Why, for example, are some mummies, such as Tutankhamun, much worse preserved than others that died hundreds of years earlier? This may indicate variations in natron quality, embalming methods, or storage conditions. Another intriguing mystery is the use of various resins, oils, and balms to impregnate the body after dehydration. After removing the entrails and treating them with natron, the body was washed, filled with incense, such as myrrh and cassia, and then covered with layers of resins, beeswax, and vegetable oils. It is considered that these substances not only did they give the body elasticity and a pleasant smell, but they also served as an additional protection against decomposition and insects. Modern studies of the chemical composition of these resins, conducted using mass spectrometry and gas chromatography, show that the Egyptians used complex mixtures of pine resin, cedar oil, pistachio resin, bitumen, and even animal fats. How did they get these ingredients, many of which didn't grow in Egypt like cedar from Lebanon, in such quantities? And how did they empirically determine which resin combinations would be most effective for long-term preservation, given their antiseptic, fungicidal, and insecticidal properties? This knowledge was extremely advanced for its time, and in fact represents an early form of conservation chemistry. The puzzle also concerns the removal of internal organs and the brain. Most of the organs, except for the heart, which was considered the center of the mind and emotions, were removed through a small incision on the left side and placed in canopic jars. The brain was usually removed through the nose using special hooks. This process required deep anatomical knowledge so as not to damage the face or body. How did they perform these manipulations with such precision and without modern lighting? And why, despite their knowledge of anatomy, did they not always accurately understand the functions of organs? For example, considering the heart and not the brain, the center of intelligence? This indicates that their knowledge was primarily empirical and ritualistic, rather than based on systematic scientific research, as is the case today. The mystery of ancient Egyptian mummies and embalming is not only a question of chemical processes and anatomy, it is a question of the deep relationship between science, religion, and art in ancient Egypt, of the skill passed down from generation to generation, and of man's desire to overcome death while preserving the physical shell for eternity. Many of the secrets of this complex practice may have been buried forever with the priests and embalmers who mastered this unique art. The secret of ancient Egyptian papyri. Unsolved texts and lost knowledge. Thousands of ancient Egyptian papyri found in tombs, temples, and settlements are an invaluable window into the world of this civilization. Made from the papyrus plant, these fragile scrolls contain an incredible variety of texts, from religious hymns and magical spells to medical treatises, administrative documents, literary works, and even letters from ordinary people. Thanks to the deciphering of hieroglyphs and hieratic writing, we have received a huge amount of information about the life, beliefs, and knowledge of the ancient Egyptians. However, despite this wealth, many aspects of ancient Egyptian papyri remain a deep and unsolved mystery. The main question is, how many more papyri are hidden under the sands, containing lost knowledge? Why some texts still cannot be fully deciphered? And what was the true depth of their scientific, philosophical, and historical knowledge, which may have been written down but did not survive to this day? One of the main mysteries is the lost libraries and archives. Despite the huge number of papyri found, this is probably only a small part of what existed in ancient Egypt. Great temples, such as the Temple of Horus in Edfu or the Temple of Isis on the island of Philae, had extensive libraries known as houses of life, where priests stored, copied, and studied sacred, medical, astronomical, and historical texts. The most famous was the Library of Alexandria, which, although founded in the Greco-Roman period, undoubtedly contained many ancient Egyptian papyri. However, these libraries were destroyed as a result of fires, wars, religious persecution, and simply because of the natural decay of papyrus. Most of the Egyptian papyri were destroyed by humidity, insects, and fire. This raises the question, how many priceless texts have been lost forever? What knowledge of science, philosophy, mythology, history, and everyday life were contained in them? Could they also have records explaining pyramid construction techniques, secrets to working hard stones, or detailed astronomical tables that could solve many of our current mysteries? We can only guess at the extent of this loss and how other revolutionary discoveries might have been made if these archives had survived. Another intriguing mystery is unsolved or not fully understood texts. Although the Rosetta Stone made it possible to decipher hieroglyphs, some papyri, especially those written in later forms of writing, such as Demotic or Coptic. Coptic is the last stage of the development of the ancient Egyptian language, written only in the Greek alphabet, or containing rare dialects and idioms, still present significant difficulties for translation. Some texts, such as the Westcar Papyrus, which contains magical stories, or fragments of the Book of the Dead, are full of metaphors, symbols, and references to unknown myths and rituals, making them difficult to fully understand. There are also papyri that may have been deliberately encrypted or written down in such a way that only initiates can understand them. This applies to the so-called magic papyri contain spells, amulets, and rituals, often written in a mixture of Greek, Egyptian, and Aramaic, making them extremely difficult to interpret. What was their true purpose? Were they purely magical, or did they contain elements of chemical, astrological, or medical knowledge disguised as mysticism? The mystery also concerns the process of creating and distributing papyri. How were papyri of such high quality made that some of them have survived to this day? The production of papyrus paper was a labor-intensive process that required special skills. Who created these texts? Were they professional scribes, priests, officials, or private individuals? How did these texts spread in society? Were they available only to the elite, or was there some form of mass production or copying for the less affluent? The fragments of the Book of the Dead, made for different people, show that the texts were often adapted to a specific customer, which indicates the flexibility and individualization of the process. The mystery of ancient Egyptian papyri is not just a matter of reading ancient languages. It is a search for lost pages of human knowledge, understanding how information was stored, transmitted, and transformed over thousands of years. Each new discovery of the papyrus and each new decipherment promises to reveal another fragment of this great but still incomplete narrative, leaving us waiting for new, possibly revolutionary discoveries about the wisdom hidden in these fragile scrolls. The secret of the Saqqara bird. Ancient aviators or a toy. Among the thousands of artifacts unearthed in ancient Egypt's tombs and temples, one small wooden object found in 1898 in the Padinami tomb in Saqqara continues to stir minds and spark fierce debate between traditional archaeologists and proponents of alternative theories. This is the so-called Saqqara bird, an object that resembles a toy bird, but has aerodynamic characteristics that for many seem too advanced for its time. Question: is this just a stylized image of a falcon or other bird? Or is it evidence of some lost knowledge about aerodynamics that the ancient Egyptians may have had, and even a prototype of an aircraft. The Saqqara bird is a wooden object about 18 centimeters long with a wingspan of 18.3 centimeters. It has a cylindrical body that resembles the fuselage and wings attached to the upper part of the body, which is unusual for most PTE, in which the wings are attached lower at the level of the trunk. The tail of the object is vertical, which resembles the elevator or stabilizer of a modern aircraft, and not the flat tail of a bird. The most intriguing thing about the Saqqara bird is its aerodynamic profile. Research conducted by Dr. Khalil Messiha, a professor of anatomy and paleoart from Egypt, showed that the wings of the object have a curved profile similar to that of an airplane wing, which creates lift. If it was just a stylized bird, then according to experts in aerodynamics, its wings would most likely be flat or less pronounced curved. Moreover, when testing models based on the design of the Saqqara bird with the addition of a small horizontal stabilizer, which may have been lost from the original artifact, they showed the ability to glide. This suggests that the creators of the object may have understood the principles of aerodynamics, even if they did not have the terminology to describe them. But where could such knowledge have come from in ancient Egypt, thousands of years before the invention of gliders and airplanes? Traditional Egyptology insists that the Saqqara bird is just a toy or wind indicator in the shape of a falcon, perhaps intended for a child or having a ritual meaning, symbolizing the deity of the mountains. The stylization of animals in ancient Egyptian art often moved away from strict anatomical accuracy in favor of symbolism. The presence of a vertical tail can be explained as a stylization of the bird's tail plumage, designed for balance. However, proponents of alternative theories point to the fact that most images of birds in Egypt, including falcons, have a completely different shape to the snout and tail, much more consistent with the actual anatomy. If it was just a toy, then why does it have such specific aerodynamic properties? Was this a random coincidence, or was it the result of an empirical observation of the flight in an attempt to reproduce it? Another mystery is related to the context of the find. The object was found in a tomb, which may indicate its ritual or funerary purpose. However, if it had any meaningful symbolic or religious significance, why is it mentioned so little in other texts or images? And why wasn't it made of more valuable materials, like many other funerary objects? The lack of any other archaeological evidence pointing to attempts to build aircraft in ancient Egypt also makes it difficult to accept the hypothesis of a prototype aircraft. But on the other hand, how can we be sure that all such evidence has been preserved, and how many other similar objects that could confirm or refute this theory are still hidden in unexplored tombs? The mystery of the Saqqara bird remains one of the clearest examples of how a single artifact can raise grandiose questions about the technological level of ancient civilizations. Was it an accidental invention, or is it a tiny piece of lost knowledge that still challenges our understanding of the history of aerodynamics? So far, the Saqqara bird continues to silently plan in the museum, waiting for new discoveries to reveal its true purpose. The secret of electricity in Dendera, lamps or symbolic images. In the majestic temple of Hathor in Dendera, located north of Luxor, bas-reliefs are hidden on the walls of one of the crypts, which for decades have been the source of one of the most provocative and inexplicable mysteries of ancient Egypt. These images, known as Dendera lamps, show figures holding objects that resemble giant incandescent lamps or some kind of energy device, inside which a snake, a symbol of energy or electricity, twists, and from them a cable leads to an energy source. Proponents of alternative theories interpret these bas-reliefs as evidence that the ancient Egyptians had knowledge of electricity and used some form of electric lighting, which allowed them to work in deep, dark tombs without the use of torches, without leaving traces of soot. The main mystery of the Dendera lamps is their visual similarity to modern electrical devices. The bas-reliefs depict people holding elongated, transparent objects in their hands, inside which you can see a wriggling snake, whose head is located in the wide part of the lamp, and the tail stretches to a narrower end from where a kind of wire comes out, ending on a certain base resembling an insulator or generator. Some interpret the snake as an electric discharge or incandescent filament, and the object itself as a huge incandescent lamp or Crookes tube. an early type of gas discharge lamp. If they were really lamps, it would solve the mystery of the absence of soot from torches in the deep, hermetically sealed tombs and underground passages where the Egyptians created their intricate frescoes and inscriptions. The traditional explanation of using mirrors to reflect sunlight or oil lamps that did not produce soot, although such lamps would have produced extremely dim light, does not always seem convincing in the absolute darkness of deep tombs. The hypothesis of Dendera lamps as light sources suggests that the Egyptians have knowledge about the production of electricity, glass and vacuum technologies, which would radically change our understanding of their technological level. However, traditional Egyptology offers a completely different symbolic explanation of these images. According to this interpretation, the bas-reliefs represent the Djed pillar and the lotus, two ancient Egyptian symbols closely associated with fertility, rebirth, and mythology. The Djed pillar, often depicted as a pillar with several horizontal rungs, symbolized the stability and spine of Osiris. The lotus emerging from the water was a symbol of creation and rebirth. From the lotus, which in this case is stylized as a lamp, appears a snake, a symbol of the god Neb-Kau, a chthonic deity associated with life force and protection. The hands that hold the lamp belong to deities or priests performing rituals. The cable or wire in this interpretation is either part of the lotus itself, its stem, or a symbolic representation of the flow of vital energy. The stylized nature of Egyptian art often led to the fact that the images were not always realistic, but had a deep symbolic meaning that only initiates could understand. Thus, what looks like technology to modern humans was a religious allegory to the ancient Egyptian. The mystery also concerns the lack of other archaeological evidence for the use of electricity. If the Egyptians had possessed such technology, then the remains of generators, wires, lamps, power tools, or at least written references to them should have been found. Nothing like this has been found yet. This makes the electricity in Dendera hypothesis highly speculative, despite the visual similarities. However, proponents of alternative theories object that much ancient knowledge may have been lost, or that such technologies may have been used only by a limited circle of priests or chosen ones and deliberately hidden from the masses. They also indicate that many artifacts that could support these theories may have been destroyed, not found, or misinterpreted. The mystery of electricity in Dendera is a vivid example of how modern thinking tries to find logical explanations for ancient phenomena when faced with the limitations of our knowledge. Were these bas-reliefs just highly artistic symbolism, or did they really contain a hint of technology which we are just beginning to understand, and which challenge our ideas about the possibilities of ancient civilizations? This is one of those mysteries that continues to fuel debate and inspire new, sometimes bold research. The secret of ancient Egyptian catacombs and underground cities, riddles of the underworld. Beneath the surface of the Egyptian desert, under thousands of years of sand and rubble, lies another grandiose and largely unexplored mystery of ancient Egypt. A vast network of catacombs, underground temples, and entire underground cities. These labyrinths, carved out of the rock, served a variety of purposes, from burials and ritual centers to possibly shelters or storehouses. However, the scale of these underground structures, the accuracy of their construction, and the true purpose of many of them remain unsolved, raising questions about the Egyptians' ability to build underground and their understanding of geology. One of the most famous and impressive parts of this underground network is the Serapeum at Saqqara, which we have already discussed in the context of the Apis bull sarcophagi. But the Serapeum is only a small part of a much more extensive and poorly understood system of underground passages and chambers located under the Saqqara necropolis. In addition to the burials of sacred bulls, there are catacombs for mummified cats, dogs, ibises, and baboons, numbering millions of animals. These tunnels stretch for kilometers and contain hundreds of thousands of niches with mummies. How did the Egyptians organize such large-scale animal cemeteries? What was the logistics of keeping and embalming such a large number of animals? These catacombs, with their perfectly carved galleries and chambers, demonstrate the amazing skill of underground construction. What tools and methods did they use to cut such long and smooth tunnels through solid rock deep underground? while still providing ventilation and lighting. The absence of soot from torches on the walls of many deep galleries remains a mystery, hinting at the possible use of unknown light sources on Earth. Even more puzzling are the speculations about the existence of underground cities or vast shelters, which are mentioned in some ancient texts or legends, but whose archaeological evidence is extremely scarce. For example, the Book of Thoth, a mythical text attributed to the ancient Egyptian god of wisdom Thoth, is said to have been kept in a secret underground library. Although this may be only a myth, it reflects the idea of hidden knowledge and structures. The historian Herodotus mentioned the existence of a huge underground labyrinth with 3,000 rooms, located somewhere near Lake Maris, modern Fayum. Despite numerous attempts, this legendary labyrinth has not yet been discovered, or its ruins have not been identified with sufficient certainty. Could such colossal underground complexes exist and serve not only for burials, but also for other purposes? For example, as shelters from intruders, food storage centers, or even as secret schools and repositories of knowledge that were supposed to be hidden from the eyes of outsiders? The riddle is also related to the purpose and symbolism of underground structures. In Egyptian cosmology, the underworld, Duat, was a place of posthumous travel, but also a source of rebirth. The construction of underground tombs such as the Valley of the Kings was a direct reflection of these beliefs. But why did some of these structures reach such an incredible scale and complexity? Were they simply tombs, or did they perform some additional ritual or even astronomical functions? For example, some tunnels may have been oriented to certain stars or planets, as is observed in some temples. How did the Egyptians plan these extensive networks, ensuring structural integrity and preventing landslides, especially in less stable rocks? This required a deep knowledge of geology and engineering. The mystery of ancient Egyptian catacombs and underground cities is not just a question of what is underground. It is a question of the scale of their underground world, the hidden purpose of their construction, and how many other unsolved secrets lie hidden in the underground part of ancient Egyptian civilization, waiting to be discovered and fully deciphered. The secret of ancient Egyptian maps, missing images of the world and their accuracy. Ancient Egypt, with its vast empire, extensive trade, and grandiose construction projects, undoubtedly needed accurate maps to manage territory, plan campaigns, navigate the Nile, and develop resources. However, unlike other ancient civilizations, such as the Babylonians or the Greeks, which left behind many geographical images, ancient Egyptian maps in our modern understanding are practically absent. Only one major geographical document is known, the Turin Papyrus, which in fact is a geological map. This lack of full-fledged geographical maps, especially given their advanced knowledge of astronomy and geodesy necessary for building pyramids, is one of the most inexplicable mysteries. Where did the cards go? Were they too valuable to keep, or was their format different from ours? The main mystery is the lack of large-scale geographical maps. If the Egyptians built pyramids with a striking orientation to the cardinal directions and could measure vast distances for their construction projects and trade expeditions, then they must have had methods for mapping their territories. The Egyptian empire stretched from Syria in the north to Sudan in the south. They had military campaigns, trade missions to Punt and other remote lands, and large-scale irrigation projects that required detailed planning and mapping of the area. However, we find no maps of the coast, no maps of military campaigns, or even detailed maps of the Nile itself, except for schematic images. The Turin Papyrus, dated to about 1150 BC, depicts an area of gold mines in the eastern desert, indicating the location of mountains, roads, settlements, and even the colors of various rocks. This is an incredibly accurate geological map for its time. But why is this the exception and not the rule? Another intriguing mystery is the possible shapes and materials of the cards. Perhaps the Egyptians did not use papyrus to create maps, but other less durable materials. For example, maps could be drawn on leather scrolls, wooden tablets covered with plaster, or even on the walls of buildings that have not survived to this day. Using sand or earth to create large-scale temporary maps for planning construction work or military maneuvers is also possible. Some scientists suggest that their maps may have been not so much geographical images as route descriptions, or lists of places that were transmitted orally or in the form of lists, or their geographical knowledge was so culturally ingrained that it did not require formal mapping. However, to manage such a huge empire, collect taxes, generate resources, and coordinate projects, some kind of spatial organization tools were logistically necessary. The puzzle also concerns the reference point and coordinate systems. How did the Egyptians measure distances and navigate the terrain? They undoubtedly used astronomical observations to determine direction, for example by the North Star or other constellations, as well as probably simple geodetic tools such as measuring ropes, plumb lines, and levels. Their knowledge of geometry, for example for marking fields after Nile floods, was well developed. Could this knowledge have been used to create complex map projections that we simply cannot identify? The lack of clear maps in our understanding contrasts with their high level of development in other areas related to spatial thinking. The mystery of ancient Egyptian maps is not just a question of where they are located. It is a question of how their information management system functioned, how they imagined their world, and how deep their knowledge of geodesy and cartography was, which may have been lost or hidden in other forms, waiting to be discovered or approached again to interplay. Perhaps we simply don't look for them in the right places, or we don't recognize them in the forms in which they have come down to us. The secret of the water spring weren't in the Pyramid of Cheops, unknown cameras, and hydraulic engineering riddles. Among the many internal mysteries of the Great Pyramid of Cheops, one of the most intriguing and still unexplained is the so-called water spring, or more precisely, the mysterious underground chamber located deep under the base of the pyramid. This chamber, carved into the rocky ground, is located well below the floor level of the King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber, and impresses with its unfinished rough shape, as well as the presence of a deep well or shaft, and known as the well shaft, which leads even deeper into the unknown. Its purpose, its construction methods in such depth, and the fact that it appears incomplete give rise to a lot of speculation. Was it the original burial chamber, a hydrotechnical structure, part of some kind of energy system, or is its true purpose still beyond our understanding? The main mystery of the underground chamber is its purpose and rough execution. Unlike the strikingly precise and elaborately finished upper chambers, this underground chamber looks as if work has been abruptly stopped. The walls are rough, the floor is uneven, and in one corner there is a deep, almost vertical shaft that goes even deeper into the rock, known as the well shaft, ending in a dead end after about 15 meters. Traditional Egyptology suggests that this chamber was supposed to be the original burial chamber of Cheops, but for some reason, perhaps a change in the pharaoh's plans or the discovery of a more suitable site above, the project was abandoned. However, if this is the case, why is it so crudely carved, and why was the work stopped at this stage? What equipment was used to carve such a large hole deep underground? Some researchers, including those who adhere to alternative theories, point out that this could be not just a burial chamber, but part of some kind of hydraulic system connected to underground waters. Perhaps the shaft led to an aquifer, and the chamber was designed to collect water or monitor its level. But what could the water be used for inside the pyramid or under it? Another intriguing mystery is the well shaft, which connects the underground chamber to the upper gallery, or grand gallery, passing through layers of rock and rock. This mine is one of the most inaccessible parts of the pyramid. It has no obvious functional purpose for moving bull shackles or people after construction is complete, and its walls are also very rough-hewn. It is assumed that it may have served for ventilation during construction, or as a way for workers to leave the chamber after it was sealed. However, its complex, uneven trajectory and vertical slope make it extremely inconvenient for these purposes. Some theories suggest that it may have been part of some kind of hydraulic system, perhaps to balance the weight or to move some liquids, or that it was a kind of relief valve for some kind of energy or acoustic system that the ancient builders might have used. Absence of any traces of water or its use in an underground chamber or well shaft contradicts hydraulic engineering theories, but this may be due to the fact that the water has long evaporated or been removed. The mystery is also related to the construction methods in such depth. To carve this chamber and mine required not only a huge amount of labor, but also effective methods of removing the extracted rock, as well as providing lighting and ventilation in conditions of complete darkness and confined space. How did the workers orient and maintain the direction of the shaft and chamber deep underground without modern geodetic instruments? And why was the work stopped so abruptly without even trying to disguise or hide the incompleteness? Some alternative hypotheses suggest that the underground chamber may have been part of a geoenergy installation designed to use the Earth's energy, or an acoustic chamber that amplifies vibrations. These theories are highly speculative, of course, but they arise from the lack of convincing traditional explanations that would fully explain the strange characteristics and purpose of this deepest and most mysterious part of the Great Pyramid. The mystery of the water spring and underground chamber in the Pyramid of Cheops remains one of the most exciting challenges for researchers, hinting at hidden, perhaps unidentified aspects of this greatest of all pyramids that are still waiting to be fully revealed. The secret of unknown kings and dynasties, gaps in the royal lists, and forgotten rulers. Ancient Egypt, with its more than 3,000 years of history, is known for its rich and detailed chronology based on royal lists such as the Palermo stone, the Turin royal papyrus, and the Abydos king list. These documents, carved in stone or written on papyri, list the pharaohs, their years of rule, and sometimes even important events. Thanks to them, we can largely reconstruct the sequence of dynasties and reigns. However, despite this wealth of sources, there are still significant gaps in the ancient Egyptian chronology and the Dark Ages, when information about the rulers is scarce or completely absent. This raises one of the most profound historical mysteries. How many other unknown pharaohs and entire dynasties may have ruled Egypt, about which we still know nothing? And what events may have occurred during these periods, forever erased from history? The main mystery lies in the Dark Ages of Egyptian history, such as the first and second transition periods, as well as individual gaps in later dynasties. During these periods, central power weakened, Egypt broke up into several independent states ruled by local princes, and historical records became extremely fragmentary. Royal lists compiled in later stable periods often ignored or omitted the names of rulers who were considered usurpers or were hostile to the ruling dynasty. For example, the names of some Amarna-era pharaohs, such as Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Saqqara, and Eye, were erased from official lists by subsequent rulers seeking to erase the memory of their heretical period. How many other such, deleted or simply unaccounted for pharaohs were there in the history of Egypt? Some royal lists also contain lacunae, empty spaces where the names of rulers are missing. Can these gaps be filled with names that have not yet been discovered? Another intriguing mystery is the inconsistencies between the various royal lists. Different lists may contain different names, sequences, or periods of reigns of the same pharaohs, which creates difficulties for historians trying to create a single, unquestionable chronology. This may be due to copying errors, political reasons, deliberate modification of records, or simply the use of different information sources. For example, the Turin Royal Papyrus, although the most complete, is very fragmented and contains many gaps. How can we be sure of the identity of our current chronology if its main sources contain such discrepancies? There may be other royal lists that have not yet been found that could clarify these inconsistencies and fill in the gaps. The mystery also concerns the identification of some little-known pharaohs and their boards. Sometimes archaeologists find artifacts such as scarabs, stelae, or statue fragments with the names of rulers that are not included in the main royal lists or are mentioned only in passing. This raises questions. Were these pharaohs local rulers who controlled only small territories? Or were they part of short-lived, unknown dynasties that were never included in the official chronicles? Each such artifact with a new name is a tiny fragment that can redefine our understanding of entire historical periods. For example, the discovery of the tomb of such a little-known pharaoh as Senebkhay, king of the Theban dynasty, in 2014 provided valuable information about the period that was considered the Dark Age. How many more such forgotten rulers are waiting to be discovered under the sands? The mystery of unknown kings and dynasties is not just an academic puzzle for Egyptologists. It is a search for lost chapters in the history of one of the most ancient civilizations, an attempt to reconstruct the full picture of its development, power struggles, and disappeared names that once owned all this great land. Each new discovery can change our understanding of how fragmentary our knowledge of the true history of ancient Egypt is. The secret of ancient Egyptian musical instruments and sounds. Lost melodies and acoustic riddles. Ancient Egypt, like any developed civilization, undoubtedly had a rich musical culture. Images on the walls of tombs and temples, numerous figurines and tools found by archaeologists indicate that music played an important role in religious rituals, celebrations, funeral ceremonies, and everyday life. We see images of harps, lutes, flutes, sistrums, drums, and trumpets. However, despite these numerous evidences, the real sounds of ancient Egyptian music, their melodies, harmonies, and rhythms, are forever lost to us. This raises a deep and inexplicable mystery. What did this music sound like? What scales and keys did the Egyptians use? And what acoustic principles could have been embedded in the design of their instruments and even in the architecture of their temples, about which we still do not have a complete idea? The main mystery is the lack of musical notation or a system for recording melodies. Unlike the written language, which was carefully developed and preserved, the ancient Egyptians did not leave behind anything that could be interpreted as a musical notation or a system for playing specific melodies. We only see images of musicians and instruments, but we don't know what they were playing. This makes reconstructing their music extremely difficult and largely hypothetical. We can only speculate about the nature of their music based on the instruments they had and their general understanding of the ancient musical traditions of the Middle East. Did they have developed polyphonic structures, or was their music mostly monophonic? Did they use any specific frets or scales? The lack of this information means that any attempt to reproduce ancient Egyptian music will only be a modern interpretation based on limited data. Another intriguing mystery is the acoustic properties of the instruments and rooms themselves. Many of the instruments found, such as flutes and harps, have been preserved in fragments, making it difficult to accurately reconstruct them and determine their original sound and structure. For example, determining the number of holes on flutes and their exact placement is critical to understanding their range and frets. Some scholars suggest that the Egyptians may have had an empirical knowledge of acoustics that allowed them to create instruments with certain tonal characteristics. Moreover, there is a hypothesis that some temples and burial chambers may have had special acoustic properties that amplified or distorted sounds, creating the effect of resonance or echo. For example, in some tombs, niches or rooms were found that, when certain sounds were heard, could create unusual acoustic effects. Was this a coincidence, or was it a deliberate architectural design designed to enhance the religious or ritual experience? Could the priests have used these acoustic features to create a mystical atmosphere during ceremonies, using sound for impact on the consciousness of the participants? The mystery also concerns the use of music in rituals and its psychological effects. Music undoubtedly played a key role in religious processions, worship of the gods, and funerary rites. Sistrums, for example, were used to ward off evil spirits and appease the goddess Hathor. The drums set the rhythm of the dance. What was the emotional impact of this music on the ancient Egyptians? Were music and rhythm used as a way to enter a trance or to achieve altered states of consciousness during rituals? Modern researchers are trying to reconstruct instruments and play them to get at least some idea of the sound. However, even if we have copies of the instruments, without understanding the melodies and context, we still remain only on the surface. The mystery of ancient Egyptian musical instruments and sounds is not just an academic attempt to reconstruct lost melodies. It is a search for understanding the deep connection between music, religion, ritual, and human experience in one of the most ancient civilizations, which has fallen silent forever, leaving us with only silent images of its musicians and instruments. The secret of secret passages and unknown rooms, pyramids and sphinx. Among the most famous and studied structures of ancient Egypt, the Great Pyramids of Giza and the Great Sphinx still contain many unsolved mysteries concerning hidden passages, unknown chambers, and secret rooms. Despite decades of intensive research using state-of-the-art technologies such as ground-penetrating radars, muon tomography, and endoscopes, evidence is regularly emerging indicating the presence of yet-to-be-discovered cavities. This raises one of the most fascinating mysteries yet. How many more secret rooms and passageways are hidden inside these colossal structures? What their purpose is, and what they might contain that could dramatically change our understanding of ancient Egypt's history and technology. The main mystery is connected with the Great Pyramid of Cheops. Although its internal structure is considered well-studied, with three main chambers, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the Underground Chamber, and a complex system of corridors and galleries, new anomalies are constantly emerging. For example, in 2017, the Scan Pyramids project, using muon tomography, discovered a large, previously unknown big void with a length of about 30 meters, located above the Grand Gallery. Its purpose is still unknown. Could it be some kind of hidden camera, gallery, or even a passageway? Or is it just a design feature designed to remove loads from the gallery? The lack of visible entrances or connections to already known passageways makes it extremely difficult to investigate. In addition, there are numerous legends and ancient evidence of a secret room under the Sphinx, which is said to store some scrolls of knowledge or artifacts. Some researchers suggest that these scrolls may contain information about a lost civilization or the beginning of time. Although small niches and depressions have been found under the Sphinx, no large chambers or libraries have yet been found, which, however, does not refute their existence. Another intriguing mystery is the unexplained shafts or ventilation ducts in the King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber in the Pyramid of Cheops. These narrow, perfectly straight shafts running from the chambers to the outside, or at least towards the outer surface of the pyramid, were long considered ventilation shafts. However, their small size, about 20 cm, sinuous nature, and the fact that they do not come to the surface or end in dead ends have given rise to many alternative theories. They may have been star shafts that focused on certain stars that were important in Egyptian religion, for example Sirius or the stars of Orion, or they may have been part of a symbolic system for the exit of the pharaoh's soul to heaven. With the help of robots equipped with cameras, it was discovered that some of these mines have stone doors with copper handles at the ends, which suggests that there are some hidden rooms behind them. What is behind these gifts? Perhaps these are just symbolic barriers, or they hide valuable artifacts, or even another camera that has not yet been discovered. The mystery also concerns methods of detecting and accessing these hidden rooms. The use of penetrating radars and seismic scanning can detect anomalies within massive structures, but to confirm their nature and gain access to them requires invasive methods that can damage ancient monuments. This creates an ethical dilemma for archaeologists. How could the ancient builders have hidden these passageways and chambers so cleverly that they went unnoticed for thousands of years? Were any special construction techniques or disguises used to hide them? The mystery of secret passages and unknown rooms in the pyramids and Sphinx is not just a question of finding treasures. It is a search for answers to fundamental questions about the purpose of these structures, about the possible presence of lost knowledge that was deliberately hidden, and about how many more chapters in the history of ancient Egypt are waiting to be discovered inside these structures. Silent stone giants. Each new window into their hidden structure has the potential to upend our understanding of the entire civilization. The mystery of ancient Egyptian metal objects, the origin of iron and its inexplicable hardness. Ancient Egypt is usually associated with the Bronze Age, a period when basic tools, weapons, and luxury goods were made from copper and bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. However, archaeological finds and ancient texts periodically indicate the existence of metal objects made of iron in Egypt, long before this metal became widespread in the Iron Age, which began much later, around 1200 BC. These artifacts, such as iron beads found in a pre-dynastic tomb at Gersa, Iavlo 3200 BC, Tutankhamun's dagger, 14th century BC, and other rare items create a deep and inexplicable mystery. Where did the ancient Egyptians get this iron, and how did they process it, given the extremely high costs of mining it? Melting and forging temperatures, And why, despite its obvious strength, has it not been widely adopted for many centuries, remaining a rare and possibly mystical material? The main mystery is connected with the origin of the ancient iron. Studies of the Gersa beads showed that they were made of meteorite iron, that is, iron that came to Earth as part of meteorites. This type of iron is easily distinguished by its high nickel content, usually more than 5 to 10%, which is absent in the Earth's ore. Meteoric iron, although naturally occurring, is extremely rare, and usually not in such quantities as to allow mass production. It also has unique properties. It is already in metal form and relatively soft, which allows it to be processed by cold forging without requiring complex melting furnaces. However, even cold forging meteor iron required considerable skill and effort. How did the Egyptians find these meteorites, and how did they recognize them as metal suitable for processing? This fact explains the presence of early iron objects, but does not solve the mystery of later, earthly iron objects, such as Tutankhamun's dagger. Recent studies have confirmed that this dagger was also made of meteorite iron, but the quality of its workmanship, the presence of a gold handle and inlays, indicates that it was an object of exceptional value and probably of ritual significance. This raises the question, did the Egyptians consider iron from heaven a sacred material? And if so, why wasn't it used more widely in jewelry or as a particularly strong material for the most important tools? Another intriguing mystery is the late emergence of large-scale iron metallurgy in Egypt. Despite the presence of meteoric iron millennia before the Iron Age, the Egyptians did not master the production of iron from Earth's ore until relatively late, the end of the New Kingdom in the Third Transition Period, which is much later than in some other regions of the Middle East, for example, the Hittites. Processing of terrestrial iron ore, hematite, magnetite, requires significantly higher temperatures, more than 1500 degrees C for smelting, than those achieved in ancient Egyptian furnaces for smelting copper and bronze, about 1200 degrees C. This requires specialized forced air furnaces and an understanding of carbon steel processes. How did the Egyptians miss this technology for thousands of years, despite the seemingly developed metallurgical skills in working with copper and bronze? Was this due to the lack of readily available iron ore, which is unlikely since it is abundant in the Eastern Desert, or to religious or cultural barriers that prevented its use? Or did they simply not see the need for iron since their copper and bronze tools, thanks to a special method of quenching, nagartovka, and sharpening, were sufficiently effective for their construction and agricultural needs, which allowed them to ignore the more complex iron technology? The mystery also concerns the unexplained hardness of some copper and bronze tools found in Egypt. Despite the relative softness of these metals, the Egyptians were able to create tools from them that seemed to be able to process the hardest granite and basalt. Some researchers suggest that they may have used cold forging techniques unknown to us, or special alloys that made these metals significantly harder than expected. This may be due to the use of rare minerals in alloys or special heat treatment techniques. Could the Egyptians have known the secrets of hardening copper and bronze to such an extent that it could compete with early iron? The mystery of ancient Egyptian metal objects is not just a question of dating back to the early Iron Age. It is a question of the depth of their metallurgical knowledge, how they used and interpreted various metals, and how many other secrets are hidden in their seemingly simple metal artifacts, which with a deeper understanding can be traced back to the early Iron Age. However, they continue to challenge our understanding of ancient technologies. The mystery of Anubis and the mysterious ancient animals. Mummification and symbolism. The figure of the god Anubis, a jackal-headed or dog-headed deity, patron saint of the dead and embalming, is one of the most famous and ubiquitous in the ancient Egyptian pantheon. His image, which constantly appears in tombs on sarcophagi and papyri, is closely associated with funerary rituals and the transition to the afterlife. However, apart from its mythological significance, the very choice of the jackal or dog as a sacred animal, as well as the practice of animal mummification in general, give rise to many deep and inexplicable mysteries. The main question is, what types of jackals or dogs form the basis of the image of Anubis? Why they had such sacred significance? and how the Egyptians were able to mummify millions of animals, including even crocodiles and birds, preserving their bodies with amazing care, and at the same time leaving no detailed records of the technologies applied to non-human creatures? The main mystery of Anubis lies in the exact biological prototype of its head. Although Anubis is traditionally depicted with the head of a jackal or a wild dog, scientists are still debating which type of canid was its prototype. Ancient Egypt was home to various jackal species, such as the Egyptian jackal, now classified as a subspecies of the African wolf, and wild dogs. These animals often roam the desert edges and cemeteries, drawing attention to burial sites, which probably caused their connection with the world of the dead. However, their exact biological definition and consequently, the understanding of their behavior, which could affect the mythology of Anubis, is still controversial. Was it a specific breed of wild dog, or a generalized image of a scavenger predator that cleansed the ground of dead bodies, thereby symbolically hindering the process of decomposition and transformation? And why did the jackal, and not, say, the vulture, which is also a scavenger, get such a high divine position in the pantheon? An even bigger and more inexplicable mystery is the mummification of millions of animals. In addition to the sacred Apis bulls buried in the Serapeum, the Egyptians mummified countless other animals: cats, dogs, ibises, baboons, falcons, crocodiles, fish, and even snakes. These mummies, often placed in elaborate sarcophagi or urns, have been found in huge underground catacombs, such as the vast galleries at Saqqara, containing hundreds of thousands of feline mummies, or in Tuna El Gabel, where millions of ibises and baboons have been found. Why did the Egyptians mummify so many animals? It is assumed that these were votive mummies, offerings to the gods that represented living incarnations of deities. For example, cats for Bastet, ibises for Thoth, or intermediaries between people and the gods. However, the scale of this practice is astounding. How did they procure, breed, or capture such a large number of animals to meet the demand for mummy offerings? And how did they organize the process of embalming them, which, judging by the surviving samples, was quite thorough, although less so false than for humans? The lack of detailed papyri describing the process of animal mummification, as opposed to human mummification, leaves many questions about the techniques used, the substances used, and the labor force involved in this colossal undertaking. The mystery also concerns the symbolism and use of specific animals in religious rites. Each mummified dog, cat, or ibis was part of a complex religious system. Why did these animals become sacred symbols of certain deities? Was it related to their behavior, appearance, or place of residence? For example, cats may have been prized for their ability to protect granaries from rodents, which led to their deification. Crocodiles living in the Nile were associated with the god Sobek and fertility. Ibises were associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom, perhaps because of their way of eating. Pulling food out of the mud, they seemed knowledgeable. These beliefs have given rise to an entire animal breeding and mummification industry. The mystery of Anubis and the mysterious ancient animals is not just a question of the fauna of ancient Egypt. It's a search for deeper connections between humans, nature, and the divine, how animals integrated into a complex religious system, and the extent of their veneration that led to mass mummification, leaving us with millions of silent testimonies about beliefs long held in ancient Egypt. The oldest civilization, whose rituals and mysticism are still not fully understood. The secret of the curse of the pharaohs, chance, science, or ancient magic. The curse of the pharaohs is perhaps one of the most famous and mystical mysteries associated with ancient Egypt, which has captured the public's imagination for decades. The story of the curse became especially popular after the opening of the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, and a series of mysterious deaths that followed, including the death of Lord Carnarvon, who financed the expedition. This legend raises deep questions. Was the curse of the pharaohs a real supernatural phenomenon, the result of ancient magic, or do all these tragic events have a rational, scientific explanation associated with the dangers lurking in ancient tombs? The story of the curse began with a series of unusual and often dramatic events that were associated with the intervention in the rest of the pharaohs. Lord Carnarvon's death just a few months after the tomb was opened, from a mosquito bite that resulted in infection to Rovi, was the first in a long list of victims of the curse. It was followed by other deaths and misfortunes that befell members of the Howard Carter expedition, as well as those who were in any way connected with the tomb. The death of Lord Carnarvon's nephew, the death of the radiologist who examined the mummy of Tutankhamun, even the death of Carter's bird and his dog. Newspapers around the world picked up on these stories, hyping the myth of an ancient magical power protecting the peace of the pharaohs from intruders. The idea that ancient priests could cast powerful spells on tombs that would last even millennia later has deep roots in Egyptian mythology, where magic and divine intervention played a huge role. Indeed, many ancient tombs and sarcophagi were found with inscriptions with warnings and threats for those who dared to disturb the rest of the deceased. But were these threats only symbolic, or did they really have some kind of power? However, science offers a number of quite rational explanations for the phenomenon of cursing. One of the most likely causes is exposure to dangerous microorganisms and toxins. For thousands of years, sealed tombs could provide an ideal breeding ground for various bacteria, fungi, and spores, some of which can be pathogenic or release toxins. For example, spores of the fungus Aspergillus niger, which can cause serious respiratory diseases in people with weakened immune systems, were found. When the tomb was opened, these dormant microorganisms could have been released into the air and entered the researcher's respiratory tract. Given the lack of modern medical knowledge and protective equipment at the beginning of the 20th century, such infections could have been fatal. Lord Carnarvon, for example, suffered from asthma and had a weakened immune system, which made him particularly vulnerable. In addition, the tombs may have contained various chemicals used in embalming or in the composition of funerary objects, which may have decomposed over time, releasing toxic gases. For example, mercury or arsenic, used in some ancient recipes, could have been used in a variety of ways. Cause poisoning. Another factor is the psychological effect and autosuggestion. The belief in the curse itself could have a powerful effect on the psyche of people. Those who believed in the curse could experience increased stress, anxiety, and panic, which weakened their immune systems and made them more susceptible to diseases. Each incalculable case or illness could be interpreted as confirmation of the curse, creating a domino effect in the mind. Newspapers, seeking to increase their circulation, actively promoted the spread of these rumors, creating an atmosphere of fear and mysticism, which only increased the psychological pressure. Statistical analysis also shows that most of the expedition members lived to an advanced age, and the number of deaths directly related to autopsies did not exceed the usual mortality rate for a group of people of this age and occupation. Many of those who were cursed died many years after the tomb was opened from natural causes. The mystery of the curse of the pharaohs is not just a struggle between mysticism and science. It is a complex phenomenon that combines ancient beliefs, real dangers, and psychological impact. Although the scientific explanations seem the most convincing, the legend of the curse lives on, reminding us that ancient Egypt was a civilization where the line between the material and the supernatural was much thinner than in our modern world, and where faith in magic and the protection of the gods was as real as material goods. And this belief may have been the most powerful force protecting the peace of the pharaohs from intruders. The secret of ancient Egyptian musical instruments and sounds, lost melodies, and acoustic riddles. Ancient Egypt, like any highly developed civilization, undoubtedly had a rich and complex musical culture. Numerous images on the walls of tombs and temples, various statuettes of musicians, as well as fragments and whole samples of musical instruments found by archaeologists, serve as a clear evidence that music played an integral and important role in various aspects of the life of the ancient Egyptians. It accompanied religious rituals and temple ceremonies, solemn processions and festivals, funeral rites, and was also part of everyday life, entertainment, and even work activities. We see images that reproduce in detail harps of various sizes and shapes, lutes that look like guitars, longitudinal and transverse flutes, double clarinets, percussion instruments such as drums and tambourines, as well as instruments unique to Egypt, such as sistra, rattles used in rituals. However, despite this abundance of visual and archaeological evidence, the real sounds of ancient Egyptian music, their unique melodies, harmonies, rhythmic patterns, and vocal styles, are forever lost to us. This creates a deep and still unexplained mystery. How exactly this music sounded, what musical scales and keys the Egyptians used, and what acoustic principles could have been embedded not only in the design of their instruments, but even in the architecture of their temples and tombs, creating the unique sound environment that we still know about, don't have a complete and reliable idea. The main and most fundamental mystery lies in the complete absence of musical notation or any system of recording melodies. Unlike their well-developed and well-preserved writing system, hieroglyphs, hieratics, demotics, which thoroughly documented their history, religion, science, and everyday life, the ancient Egyptians left behind nothing that could be interpreted as a musical notation, a graphic representation of a melody, or a system that allows accurate reproduction of specific pieces of music. We only have images of musicians playing instruments, but we don't know what exactly they played, what note sequences made up their compositions, or how these notes were combined with each other. This makes reconstructing their music extremely difficult and largely hypothetical. We can only speculate about the nature of their music based on the structure of the instruments found, for example, the length of flutes, the tension of harp strings, which may indicate approximate intervals and keys, and on general ideas about the ancient musical traditions of the Middle East and the Mediterranean, where monophony, one voice or two parts, is used as a basis for the development of melody, was more common than complex polyphony. Did they use pentatonic frets, diatonic scales, or some unique interval system? The lack of this information means that any attempt to reproduce ancient Egyptian music will only be a modern interpretation based on limited data and not an accurate historical reconstruction. Another intriguing mystery is the acoustic properties of the instruments themselves, and more ambitiously, the spaces in which the music was performed. Many of the musical instruments found, such as flutes, clarinets, and harp fragments, are preserved in various states, often incompletely, making it difficult to accurately reconstruct them and determine their original sound, timbre, and structure. For example, determining the exact number and location of holes on wind instruments, as well as string tension on strings, is critical to understanding their range and possible frets. Some scientists suggest that the Egyptians may have had a developed empirical knowledge of acoustics and material science, which allowed them to create instruments with certain predefined tonal characteristics and resonant properties. Moreover, there is an exciting hypothesis that some temples, their inner halls, as well as burial chambers and underground passages, may have had special acoustic properties that amplified, distorted, or reverberated sounds, creating unique resonance or echo effects. For example, in some tombs and temple complexes, niches, narrow corridors, or specially carved rooms have been found that, at certain sounds or frequencies, can create unusual acoustic phenomena, such as standing waves or the voice of God effect. Was it a coincidence, the result of their mastery of stone, or a deliberate architectural and engineering design designed to enhance a religious or ritual experience? Could the priests have used these acoustic features to create a mystical and reverent atmosphere during the ceremonies, using sound to influence the emotional and even mental state of the participants, putting them in a trance or enhanced spiritual experience? The mystery also concerns the use of music in rituals and its profound psychological impact. Music undoubtedly played a key role in religious processions, worship of the gods, healing rites, and funerary ceremonies. Sistrums, for example, were not just rattles but sacred tools used to ward off evil spirits, appease the goddess Hathor, and summon divine powers. The drums set the rhythm for dances that could be part of a ritual worship. What was the emotional and spiritual impact of this music on the ancient Egyptians? Have music and rhythm been used as a way to achieve altered states of consciousness, meditate, or enter trance during rituals, thereby promoting a connection with the divine? Modern researchers and musicians are making attempts to reconstruct ancient Egyptian instruments and play them on their own, to get at least some tangible idea of the sound. However, even if we have exact copies of the instruments without understanding their melodies, harmonies, rhythmic patterns, and the context of their performance, we still remain only on the surface, trying only to guess the true nature of this ancient music. The mystery of ancient Egyptian musical instruments and sounds is not just an academic attempt to reconstruct lost melodies. It is a search for understanding the deep and indissoluble connection between music, religion, ritual, and human experience in one of the most ancient and advanced civilizations, which despite its greatness was forever silenced, leaving us only silent images of its musicians and musicians. Instruments waiting for us to perhaps one day hear the echo of their lost melodies again. The mystery of ancient Egyptian utopias and ideal cities, fantasy or unknown reality. In our view, ancient Egypt is, first of all, majestic temples, monumental pyramids and tombs that testify to the cult of death and the afterlife. However, in addition to these funerary complexes, ancient Egyptian cities existed and flourished, centers of life, trade, crafts, and administration. Despite this, most of these cities, with the exception of some religious or funerary centers, are poorly preserved to this day. This gives rise to a deep and still not fully understood mystery. What were these cities really like? Whether there were concepts of an ideal city or a utopia in Egypt, how they were planned and built, and why many of them turned out to be so fragile and short-lived compared to their stone burial structures? The main mystery is the lack of well-preserved urban centers. Unlike Rome, Greece, or even Mesopotamia, where there are significant ruins of ancient cities with streets, houses, and public buildings, ancient Egyptian cities are often represented only in fragments. Most of them were built from unfired adobe bricks, a material that is very well suited to hot and dry climates, but is extremely short-lived in conditions of flooding, erosion, and subsequent development. This led to the fact that most residential areas simply disappeared into time, turning into low hills of silt and brick chips. This creates a huge gap in our understanding of the daily life of Egyptians. How were their cities organized? Where did artisans, merchants, officials, and ordinary workers live? What were the public spaces, markets, schools, or meeting places? We can only reconstruct it based on indirect evidence, such as images on the walls of tombs, rare surviving plans, and individual archaeological finds, but there is still no complete picture. Another intriguing mystery is the concept of the perfect city in ancient Egypt. Although the Egyptians did not have such philosophical treatises about the ideal city as the Greeks, for example, Plato's State, their architectural and engineering designs show an amazing desire for order, symmetry, and functionality. An example of such an ideal city is Akhetaten, modern Amarna, a city built by Pharaoh Akhenaten in honor of the new god Aten. This city was built in a very short period of time, only a few years, according to a clear, pre-thought-out plan with wide avenues, palaces, temples, residential quarters, and craft workshops. It was located in a pristine area, which allowed for an innovative approach to urban planning. However, after Akhenaten's death, the city was abandoned and destroyed, making it a unique snapshot of Egyptian urban construction. Were there other similar ideal cities that did not survive or were not discovered? And how did the Egyptians cope with such tasks as water supply, sewerage, and waste management in large urban centers, given their lack of developed infrastructure by modern standards? Did they have any urban planning standards or laws that regulated development? The mystery also concerns the role of the Nile in shaping cities and their vulnerability. All of Egypt's major cities were located along the Nile, which was the source of life, transportation, and agricultural land. However, the Nile was also a source of destruction. Annual floods, although they brought fertile silt, could wash away entire settlements. The constant change of the riverbed and the accumulation of silt also led to the fact that the old cities were gradually flooded or covered with new layers of sediments. This explains why many ancient cities lie deep beneath modern settlements or farmlands, making them extremely difficult to excavate. Perhaps the Egyptians had some methods to protect their cities from the ravages of the Nile that we don't fully understand yet. Or they simply accepted this natural cycle, Knowing that cities are temporary structures designed for life, as opposed to eternal tombs designed for the afterlife. The mystery of ancient Egyptian utopias and ideal cities is not just a search for ruins, it is an attempt to recreate a living picture of everyday life, understand urban planning principles, and perhaps discover evidence of social experiments or unique forms of urban planning that were different from our understanding of ancient Egypt as the land of the dead. Every new fragment of clay brick or remnant of a city wall can open up a new page about these long-gone but equally significant centers of ancient civilization. The secret of ancient Egyptian technologies for moving massive blocks. Lost knowledge or primitive genius. One of the greatest and most intriguing mysteries of ancient Egypt, which continues to provoke fierce debate and numerous theories, is the ability of the Egyptians to move and lift multi-ton stone blocks to build their grandiose structures, pyramids, obelisks, temples, and colossal statues. How could a civilization that did not have, according to conventional wisdom, wheels at the time of the pyramids, complex machines such as pulleys or cranes, and steel tools, work with such amazing accuracy with stone, moving blocks weighing tens or hundreds of tons over considerable distances and lifting them to enormous heights? This raises deep questions about technology, lost knowledge, or a level of primitive genius that we still can't fully understand or replicate. The main mystery lies in the technologies of quarrying, transportation, and lifting. Thousands of blocks weighing between 2 and 80 tons were quarried from quarries such as Aswan for granite or Tura for limestone, then transported hundreds of kilometers away and then raised to a height of 146 meters for the Great Pyramid of Cheops. Traditional theory suggests that the Egyptians used a huge amount of labor, tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, primitive tools made of copper, dolerite, and wood, and a number of ingenious methods. Quarries. Copper chisels and wooden wedges were used to separate blocks from the rock, which were hammered into pre-hollowed holes. Then the wedges were wetted with water, expanded, creating cracks and separating the blocks. For hard rocks, such as granite, dolerite balls were used, hard, heavy stones that workers beat on the surface, gradually destroying the rock. However, the precision with which these blocks were cut, especially multi-ton ones, remains amazing. Transportation. Large blocks were probably moved overland on wooden sleds pulled by numerous workers on specially prepared roads, possibly wetted with water to reduce friction. This is evidenced by the image on the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, which shows the transportation of a colossal statue on a sled, while a person pours water in front of the sled. For transportation along the Nile, special barges were used that could withstand a huge weight. But how exactly were such heavy blocks loaded and unloaded on and off barges? Climb. The biggest puzzle is lifting blocks to a height. Generally accepted theory suggests the use of ramps, inclined embankments where blocks were dragged or rolled up. However, there are many hypotheses about the type of ramps. Straight ramps, which would be too long and massive for the Great Pyramid, spiral ramps, which could encircle the pyramid, or internal ramps. None of these theories have strong archaeological evidence, and reconstructions show that even with ramps, lifting the upper blocks would be extremely difficult, requiring incredible logistics and coordination. Another intriguing mystery is the inexplicable accuracy and fit of the blocks. Despite the colossal size of the blocks, they are fitted to each other with incredible accuracy, sometimes with gaps of less than a millimeter. How did the Egyptians achieve such precision without modern measuring instruments and grinding equipment? Was this the result of lapping the blocks in place or using unknown surface treatment methods? There are also puzzles related to the transportation and installation of obelisks that weighed hundreds of tons and were placed vertically. How did they lift and trap these giant monoliths using essentially nothing but levers, ropes, and ramps? Reconstruction experiments have shown that this would be possible, but extremely time-consuming and risky, requiring perfect coordination and thousands of workers. The puzzle also concerns the use of unknown tools or methods. Some alternative theories suggest that the Egyptians may have used more advanced technologies that we don't know about. For example, some form of sound levitation or energy technologies, or even lost knowledge about concrete blocks that could have been poured in place. Although these theories lack scientific support and often ignore archaeological evidence, they arise from the fact that conventional explanations, while possible, still seem incredibly complex and time-consuming for such a scale and accuracy. And the mystery of ancient Egyptian technologies for moving massive blocks is not just a question of how they did it, it is a question of the limits of human capabilities in ancient times, of the genius of engineering that still challenges modern specialists, and of how many more secrets are hidden in these silent stones that continue to stand. Bearing witness to the greatness and inexplicable achievements of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. The mystery of ancient Egyptian utopias and ideal cities, fantasy or unknown reality. In our view, ancient Egypt is, first of all, majestic temples, monumental pyramids and tombs that testify to the cult of death and the afterlife, the desire for eternity and the glorification of the gods and pharaohs. However, in addition to these impressive funerary and cult complexes, ancient Egyptian cities have existed and flourished for thousands of years, drevne Gipitski Goroda, vibrant centers of daily life, commerce, crafts, administration, and social interactions. Despite their obvious importance to the functioning of civilization, most of these cities, with the exception of some religious centers that were built of stone, have been poorly preserved to this day, leaving only scanty ruins. This gives rise to a deep and still not fully solved mystery: what these cities really were like, whether there were concepts of an ideal city or utopia in ancient Egypt in a different sense than ours, how they were planned and built, and why many of them turned out to be so fragile and short-lived compared to their monumental stone burial structures that still stand today. The main and most tangible conundrum is the practical lack of well-preserved urban centers. Unlike ancient Roman or Greek cities, as well as some Mesopotamian cities, which have significant ruins with clearly defined streets, squares, public buildings, and even residential buildings, ancient Egyptian cities are often represented only by indistinct fragments of walls and foundations. The main reason for this is that the vast majority of residential, administrative, and even many temple structures in cities were built from unfired raw bricks, adobe, a material consisting of clay, silt, and straw. This material was economical, easily accessible, and very well suited to the hot and dry climate of Egypt, providing a cool indoor environment. However, raw bricks are extremely short-lived in the conditions of periodic floods from the Nile floods, erosion, and subsequent development, when new generations were built on the ruins of the old ones. This led to the fact that most residential areas simply disappeared in time, turning into low hills of silt and brick chips, or were buried under modern settlements. This situation creates a huge gap in our understanding of the daily life of Egyptians. How were their cities organized? Where exactly did the artisans, merchants, numerous officials, and ordinary workers live? What were the public spaces? Markets, squares, schools, barracks, places for recreation and meetings? We can only reconstruct it from indirect evidence, such as rare surviving city plans. For example, the plan of workers, settlements in Deir el-Medina, images on the walls of tombs depicting street scenes and scattered archaeological finds, but there is still no complete picture. Another intriguing mystery is the existence and implementation of the ideal city concept in ancient Egypt. Although the Egyptians probably did not have such detailed philosophical treatises on the ideal social structure and urban planning as the Greeks did in Plato's State, their ambitious architectural and engineering designs show a remarkable desire for order, symmetry, functionality, and harmony. A vivid example of such an ideal city brought to life is Akhetaten, modern Amarna, a city founded by Pharaoh Akhenaten in the middle of the 14th century BC and dedicated to the new solar god Aten. This city was built in an incredibly short time, in just a few years, on a virgin territory far from the old centers of power. It was built according to a clear, pre-planned plan, with wide central avenues, magnificent palaces for the pharaoh and his family, extensive temple complexes, functional residential neighborhoods divided by social status, and specialized craft workshops. The layout of Akhetaten shows a striking organization of space and centralized management of construction. However, after Akhenaten's death and return to the traditional cult of Amun, the city was suddenly abandoned and purposefully destroyed, which on the one hand makes it a unique snapshot of Egyptian urban construction, but on the other hand indicates its exclusivity. Have there been other similar ideal cities that may not have survived or have not yet been discovered? And how did the Egyptians cope with such vital tasks as providing water supply, sewerage, and waste management in large urban centers, given the lack, by modern standards, of a well-developed infrastructure? Did they have any strict urban planning standards, sanitary norms, or laws that regulated development and daily life in cities? The mystery also concerns the inextricable role of the Nile in shaping cities and their paradoxical vulnerability to it. All the major cities of Egypt, without exception, were located along the banks of the Nile or its branches. Since the great river was the absolute source of life, it provided water for drinking and agriculture, was the main transport artery for people and cargo, and its annual floods brought fertile silt that fertilized the land. However, the Nile was also a source of potential destruction. Massive floods, while vital for farming, could wash away entire settlements built from the river. Unstable raw bricks, constant changes in the riverbed caused by sedimentation and erosion, as well as the accumulation of huge layers of alluvial silt, led to the fact that the old cities were gradually flooded, buried under new layers of sediments, or completely submerged. This explains why many ancient cities lie deep beneath modern settlements or farmlands, making their excavation extremely difficult and sometimes impossible without destroying modern infrastructure. It is possible that the Egyptians had some methods to protect their cities from the ravages of the Nile, such as embankments, levees, or drainage systems that we do not yet fully understand or cannot identify due to poor preservation. And if they simply accepted this natural cycle, knowing that cities are temporary, transitory structures designed for earthly life, as opposed to eternal tombs and temples designed for life in the afterlife and for communication with the gods. Taina of ancient Egyptian utopias and ideal cities is not just a search for ruins and foundations. It is an in-depth exploration of attempts to recreate a living, breathing picture of everyday life, understand the urban planning principles of the ancient Egyptians, their social organization, and perhaps discover evidence of unique forms of urban planning or even social experiments that were very different from our ideas about ancient Egypt as a land dominated by death. Each new fragment of clay brick, each found plan or remnant of the city wall, can reveal a new, exciting page about these long-gone, but no less significant and complex centers of life of the oldest civilization, which continue to keep their secrets under the thickness of sand and silt. The mystery of ancient Egyptian utopias and ideal cities, fantasy or unknown reality? In our view, ancient Egypt is, first of all, majestic temples, monumental pyramids and tombs that testify to the cult of death and the afterlife, the desire for eternity and the glorification of the gods and pharaohs. However, in addition to these impressive funerary and cult complexes, ancient Egyptian cities have existed and flourished for thousands of years. Drevny Egipetsky Grada, vibrant centers of daily life, commerce, crafts, administration, and social interactions. Despite their obvious importance to the functioning of civilization, most of these cities, with the exception of some religious centers that were built of stone, have been poorly preserved to this day, leaving only scanty ruins. This gives rise to a deep and still not fully solved mystery. What these cities really were like, whether there were concepts of an ideal city or utopia in ancient Egypt in a different sense than ours, how they were planned and built, and why many of them turned out to be so fragile and short-lived, compared to their monumental stone burial structures that still stand today. The main and most tangible conundrum is the practical lack of well-preserved urban centers. Unlike ancient Roman or Greek cities, as well as some Mesopotamian cities, which have significant ruins with clearly defined streets, squares, public buildings, and even residential buildings, ancient Egyptian cities are often represented only by indistinct fragments of walls and foundations. The main reason for this is that the vast majority of residential, administrative, and even many temple structures in cities were built from unfired raw bricks, adobe, a material consisting of clay, silt, and straw. This material was economical, easily accessible, and very well suited to the hot and dry climate of Egypt, providing a cool indoor environment. However, raw bricks are extremely short-lived in the conditions of periodic floods from the Nile floods, erosion, and subsequent development, when new generations were built on the ruins of the old ones. This led to the fact that most residential areas simply disappeared in time, turning into low hills of silt and brick chips, or were buried under modern settlements. This situation creates a huge gap in our understanding of the daily life of Egyptians. How were their cities organized? Where exactly did the artisans, merchants, numerous officials, and ordinary workers live? What were the public spaces, markets, squares, schools, barracks, places for recreation and meetings? We can only reconstruct it from indirect evidence, such as rare surviving city plans, for example, the plan of workers, settlements in Deir el-Medina, images on the walls of tombs depicting street scenes and scattered archaeological finds. But there is still no complete picture. Another intriguing mystery is the existence and implementation of the ideal city concept in ancient Egypt. Although the Egyptians probably did not have such detailed philosophical treatises on the ideal social structure and urban planning as the Greeks did in Plato's State, their ambitious architectural and engineering designs show a remarkable desire for order, symmetry, functionality, and harmony. A vivid example of such an ideal city brought to life is Akhenaten, modern Amarna, a city founded by Pharaoh Akhenaten in the middle of the 14th century BC and dedicated to the new solar god Aten. This city was built in an incredibly short time, in just a few years, on a virgin territory far from the old centers of power. It was built according to a clear, pre-planned plan with wide central avenues, magnificent palaces for the pharaoh and his family, extensive temple complexes, functional residential neighborhoods divided by social status, and specialized craft workshops. The layout of Akhenaten shows a striking organization of space and centralized management of construction. However, after Akhenaten's death and return to the traditional cult of Amun, the city was suddenly abandoned and purposefully destroyed, which on the one hand makes it a unique snapshot of Egyptian urban construction, but on the other hand indicates its exclusivity. Have there been other similar ideal cities that may not have survived or have not yet been discovered? And how did the Egyptians cope with such vital tasks as providing water supply, sewerage, and waste management in large urban centers, given the lack, by modern standards, of a well-developed infrastructure? Did they have any strict urban planning standards, sanitary norms, or laws that regulated development and daily life in cities? The mystery also concerns the inextricable role of the Nile in shaping cities and their paradoxical vulnerability to it. All the major cities of Egypt, without exception, were located along the banks of the Nile or its branches, since the great river was the absolute source of life. It provided water for drinking and agriculture, was the main transport artery for people and cargo, and its annual floods brought fertile silt that fertilized the land. However, the Nile was also a source of potential destruction. Massive floods, while vital for farming, could wash away entire settlements built from the river. Unstable raw bricks. Constant changes in the riverbed caused by sedimentation and erosion, as well as the accumulation of huge layers of alluvial silt, led to the fact that the old cities were gradually flooded, buried under new layers of sediments, or completely submerged. This explains why many ancient cities lie deep beneath modern settlements or farmlands, making their excavation extremely difficult and sometimes impossible without destroying modern infrastructure. It is possible that the Egyptians had some methods to protect their cities from the ravages of the Nile, such as embankments, levees, or drainage systems that we do not yet fully understand or cannot identify due to poor preservation. And yet they simply accepted this natural cycle, knowing that cities are temporary, transitory structures designed for earthly life, as opposed to eternal tombs and temples designed for life in the afterlife and for communication with the gods. Tina of ancient Egyptian utopias and ideal cities is not just a search for ruins and foundations. It is an in-depth exploration of attempts to recreate a living, breathing picture of everyday life, understand the urban planning principles of the ancient Egyptians, their social organization, and perhaps discover evidence of unique forms of urban planning or even social experiments that were very different from our ideas about ancient Egypt as a land dominated by death. Each new fragment of clay brick, each found plan or remnant of the city wall, can reveal a new exciting page about these long-gone, but no less significant and complex centers of life of the oldest civilization, which continue to keep their secrets under the thickness of sand and silt. The secret of ancient Egyptian technologies for moving massive blocks. Lost knowledge or primitive genius? One of the greatest, most impressive, and perhaps most intriguing mysteries of ancient Egypt, which continues to generate fierce debate and countless theories over the centuries, is the incredible, almost inexplicable ability of the Egyptians to move and lift multi-ton, colossal stone blocks to build their grand structures. We are talking not only about the Great Pyramids of Giza, but also about huge obelisks reaching the height of a multi-story building, about massive blocks of temples, about colossal statues weighing hundreds and even thousands of tons. As a civilization that, according to conventional wisdom, did not have a wheel during the pyramid construction period, it appeared later, did not use complex mechanisms such as pulleys, blocks, or cranes as we know them, and did not own steel tools, and could work with such amazing accuracy with stone by moving blocks weighing tens, hundreds, and even, in the case of an unfinished obelisk, more than 1,000 tons over considerable distances and lifting them to a huge height? This raises deep questions about whether lost technologies, secret knowledge passed down from generation to generation, or the incredible level of primitive genius and organization of work that we still cannot fully understand or reproduce. Despite all our modern engineering achievements, the main and most complex puzzle lies in the combination of quarry technologies, transportation, and lifting. Thousands of blocks ranging in weight from 2.5 tons, the average weight of a Cheops pyramid block, to 80 tons, the weight of granite blocks in the King's Chamber, and even up to 200 tons, an unfinished obelisk, were extracted from quarries located throughout Egypt. Limestone was usually quarried on the Giza Plateau, or in Tur, on the other side of the Nile, and hard granite was brought from Aswan, which is almost 900 kilometers south on the Nile. These blocks were then transported to construction sites and raised to a height of 146 meters for the Great Pyramid of Cheops. The traditional theory, which is still the most accepted among Egyptologists, suggests that the Egyptians used a huge amount of labor, estimated to be tens, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of people, as well as a number of ingenious methods and simple but effective tools. Copper chisels were used to separate the blocks from the rock, which required constant drilling. Sharpeners, wooden wedges that were hammered into previously hollowed-out holes. Then the wedges were wetted with water, expanded, creating cracks and separating the blocks from the parent rock. To work with hard rocks, such as granite, spherical dolerite balls were used, very hard, heavy stones that workers beat on the surface, gradually destroying the rock. However, it is not only the scale that is striking, but also the precision with which these blocks were cut, especially those intended for cladding or interior chambers, where an almost perfect fit was required. Large blocks quarried in the quarries probably moved around the area. Overland on huge wooden sleds pulled by numerous groups of workers on specially prepared roads ramps, perhaps wetted with water or smeared with silt to reduce friction. This is evidenced by the famous image on the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep in El Bersha, circa 1880 BC, which shows the transportation of a colossal statue on a sledge, while one person pours water or oil in front of the sledge. For transportation along the Nile, special strong barges were used, capable of withstanding a huge weight. But how exactly did such heavy blocks get loaded and unloaded on and off barges in an ancient port? And how was the process of moving through water and on land controlled to avoid damage to fragile or already processed blocks? The biggest and still not fully solved mystery is the lifting of blocks to a height of tens of meters. The generally accepted theory suggests the use of ramps, inclined embankments on which blocks were tightened or rolled up. However, there are many hypotheses about the type of these ramps. Straight ramps, which would be too long and massive for the Great Pyramid, requiring more material than the pyramid itself. Spiral ramps, which could encircle the pyramid, or internal ramps running inside the pyramid itself. None of these theories have strong archaeological evidence, and reconstructions show that even with the use of ramps, lifting the upper blocks would be extremely difficult, requiring incredible logistics, perfect coordination of thousands of workers, and colossal engineering planning. Another intriguing mystery is the inexplicable precision and perfect fit of the blocks, especially the facing stones and granite blocks in the inner chambers. Despite the colossal size of the blocks, they are fitted to each other with incredible accuracy, sometimes with gaps of less than a millimeter, which does not allow even a razor blade to pass between them. How did the Egyptians achieve such precision without modern measuring instruments, high-precision protractors, and grinding equipment? Was this the result of lapping the blocks in place or using unknown surface treatment techniques? Possibly using abrasive paste and hand polishing that achieved perfect flatness? There are also puzzles related to the transportation and installation of obelisks that weighed hundreds of tons and were placed vertically. How did they lift and trap these giant monoliths using essentially nothing but levers, ropes, and possibly bulk ramps? Reconstruction experiments have shown that this would have been possible, but extremely time-consuming, dangerous and risky, requiring perfect coordination and thousands of workers who had to act as a single organism. The mystery also concerns the possible use of unknown tools or methods. Some alternative theories, which, however, have no scientific support and often ignore archaeological evidence, suggest that the Egyptians may have used more advanced technologies that we do not know about. For example, some form of sound levitation or energy technologies based on some unknown principles, or even lost knowledge about geopolymer concrete, which could have been poured in place and not carved out of stone, although chemical analysis of most blocks refutes this theory. Although these theories remain highly speculative, they arise from the fact that conventional explanations, while possible from the point of view of physics and engineering, still seem incredibly complex and time-consuming for such a scale and accuracy at the claimed level of technology. The mystery of ancient Egyptian technologies for moving massive blocks is not just a question of how they did it. It is a fundamental question about the limits of human capabilities in ancient times, about the genius of engineering that still challenges modern specialists, and about how many more secrets are hidden in these silent stones that continue to exist. To stand as a witness to the greatness, skill, and inexplicable achievements of one of the greatest civilizations in human history. We may not yet fully understand the complexity of their technical knowledge and unique work organization. The secret of ancient Egyptian divine scents and perfumes, art or unsolved chemistry? Ancient Egypt was known not only for its grandiose structures and complex religion, but also for its extraordinarily developed art of perfumery and the use of aromatic substances. From the sacred balms used for mummification, to the exquisite incense that accompanied the gods in temples, to the personal scents of pharaohs and nobles, smell played a huge role in the daily and ritual life of Egyptians. Bottles, jars, and vessels found in tombs, as well as images on the walls showing the process of making ointments and oils, indicate a highly developed industry of perfumes. However, a deep and inexplicable mystery still remains. What specific components were included in these divine scents? How did the Egyptians achieve such persistence and complexity of aromas using primitive extraction methods? And how much did their understanding of chemistry and botany exceed what we can imagine? The main mystery lies in the lost recipes and production methods. The ancient Egyptians were masters in obtaining aromatic oils and resins from plants. They used ingredients such as myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, juniper, cypress, cedar oil, as well as various flowers, lilies, irises, and possibly even rare types of roses. One of the most famous and valuable scents was kaifi, a complex incense, the composition of which, according to the descriptions of Greek authors, Plutarch, Dioscorides, included up to 16 different ingredients, including honey, wine, raisins, resins, and spices. It was used as an incense, medicine, and even as a sleeping aid. However, the exact proportions and mixing methods of these components, as well as the processing process, for example, maceration, infusing in oil, still not fully understood. Most of the recipes, even if they existed in writing, have been lost or so generalized that they cannot be reproduced. How did the Egyptians achieve such a fine extraction of aromatic substances without modern methods of distillation or solvent extraction? They probably used the method of enfleurage, absorption of the smell of fats, or maceration, infusing vegetable raw materials in oil or water, but the accuracy and effectiveness of these processes in ancient conditions raise questions. Another intriguing mystery is the persistence and complexity of ancient Egyptian scents. Mummification, as we know, involved the use of a variety of aromatic resins and oils: frankincense, myrrh, cedar oil, pine resin, which not only prevented decomposition, but also gave the body a divine aroma, symbolizing eternal life. Some of these resins retain their aromatic properties even after thousands of years. This indicates that the Egyptians had a deep understanding of the properties of various resins and oils. Moreover, there is a suggestion that the Egyptians may have created complex perfume compositions with upper, middle, and base notes, similar to modern perfumes that are revealed over time. This required not only knowledge of individual scents, but also an understanding of their interaction and persistence. How did they experiment with these combinations, and how did they memorize or write down these formulas? For example, a recent analysis of the contents of amphorae found in the tomb of Queen Hatshepsut revealed that one of her perfumes contained components indicating the possible use of frankincense and myrrh, but the exact composition remains unclear. The mystery also concerns the sacred and symbolic meaning of scents. For the Egyptians, fragrance was not just a pleasant smell, it was a manifestation of divine power, the breath of the gods. Incense was burned in temples to appease the gods and purify the space. Mummies were blessed with scents to ensure their successful rebirth. Royalty and priests wore special scents to emphasize their status and closeness to the divine. This indicates that perfumery was not just a craft, but part of a deep religious and cultural system. The mystery of ancient Egyptian divine scents and perfumes is not only a search for lost recipes, it is an attempt to understand how the Egyptians used chemical and botanical knowledge to create a complex world of scents that served not only for personal pleasure, but also for communion with the divine, for rituals, and for eternal life. These ancient scents may have been one of the most ephemeral yet powerful expressions of their culture, still waiting to be fully unraveled. The secret of the origin of the ancient Egyptian art of war. Innovation or borrowing. Ancient Egypt, often seen as a world focused on religion and the afterlife, was also a powerful military power for thousands of years, capable of waging large-scale wars, defending its borders, and expanding its empire. From the early dynasties to the New Kingdom, when Egypt reached the peak of its military power, pharaohs led armies, conquered territories, and faced powerful enemies like the Hittites. Images on the walls of temples, for example in Karnak or Abu Simbel, as well as weapons and military equipment found, indicate a developed military art. However, a deep and inexplicable mystery still remains. What was the true origin of the ancient Egyptian art of war? How much of it was the result of their own innovations, and how much was borrowed and adapted from other peoples? And how were the Egyptians able to maintain such a huge and effective army for thousands of years? The main mystery lies in the evolution and sources of their military technologies and tactics. In the early periods, ancient and Middle Kingdoms, the Egyptian army seems to have consisted mainly of infantry armed with spears, bows, and axes. Their tactics were relatively simple, a direct clash. However, with the beginning of the Second Transition Period and the Hyksos invasion, Egypt was faced with new, more advanced military technologies, such as war chariots and sophisticated composite bows. The Hyksos probably brought these innovations with them from the Middle East. After the expulsion of the Hyksos and the beginning of the New Kingdom, the Egyptian army underwent radical changes, quickly mastering and refining these new technologies. Battle chariots became an elite branch of the military, and composite bows became powerful ranged weapons. This begs the question, how quickly and effectively were the Egyptians able to not only copy but also integrate these alien technologies into their military system? Did they have their own engineers and craftsmen capable of understanding the principles of creating composite bows and light, maneuverable chariots, or did they depend on captive craftsmen and specialists? Another intriguing mystery is the organization and logistics of huge armies. During the New Kingdom, Egyptian pharaohs, for example, Thutmose III, Ramesses II, led armies numbering tens of thousands of soldiers, making long campaigns in Syria and Nubia. Maintaining such a huge army in the field required an incredible amount of logic, providing food, water, weapons, medical care, and means of transportation. How did the Egyptians cope with these challenges, given the limited transport capacity? Did they have specialized supply units, or did each warrior have to carry most of their own supplies? Their system of training and training of troops is also little known. Did they have military academies or training camps? How did they maintain discipline and morale in such a large and diverse army, consisting of both native Egyptians and mercenaries, Nubians, Shurdans? The puzzle also concerns interactions with other military cultures and their influences. Ancient Egypt was not isolated. It constantly interacted with other powerful powers, such as the Hittite Empire, for example, the Battle of Kadesh, Mitanni, Assyria, Babylon. These interactions included not only military conflicts, but also diplomatic exchanges, trade, and possibly the exchange of military technology and ideas. To what extent did these contacts contribute to the development or change of the Egyptian art of war? Were the Egyptians innovators or rather adapters? For example, their siege mustaches, rare evidence of which is available, may have been borrowed from Asian peoples. The mystery of the origin of the ancient Egyptian art of war is not just a question of what weapons they used. It is a question of the dynamics of civilizations, the interaction of cultures, how military innovations spread throughout the ancient world, and how much the Egyptians were able to adapt and improve to remain one of the dominant forces of their time, a time whose military campaigns and tactics are still admired and questioned by historians. A journey through the labyrinthine mysteries of ancient Egypt is an immersion in a world where reality is intertwined with myth, and science is powerless before the inexplicable. We have addressed only a small part of the intriguing questions that continue to excite the minds of scientists, historians, and enthusiasts around the world. From the monumental pyramids, whose building secrets have yet to be revealed, to the mystical curses that seem to challenge rational thinking, to the subtle nuances of their daily lives hidden in vanished cities and lost melodies. Egypt remains a civilization shrouded in mystery. There is more to each of these mysteries than just a historical puzzle. In the inexplicable precision of stone processing and the ability to move multi-ton blocks, we see not only questions of engineering, but also hints of amazing ingenuity, organization, and perhaps even knowledge that has been lost for centuries. The mystery of the water spring in the secret chambers in the pyramids, discovered only with the help of modern technology, reminds us that even the most studied structures can still hold unsolved secrets that can change our understanding of their purpose. Who knows what artifacts or records might be behind these hidden passageways? The Dark Ages and the gaps in the royal lists are not just empty lines in textbooks, but the ghosts of forgotten pharaohs and entire dynasties whose stories are erased from memory, but who undoubtedly played a role in the great drama of Egyptian civilization. Every new archaeological discovery, whether it's a small tomb or a random papyrus fragment, has the potential to fill in these gaps, bringing long-forgotten names and events back to life. Even such seemingly familiar aspects as music and perfume keep their secrets. Lost melodies and the lack of musical notation make it impossible for us to hear how hymns to the gods or morning cries actually sounded. The flavors that were thought to be the breath of the gods may have been the result of chemical processes much more complex than we realize, and their recipes, if they existed, have been lost forever. These invisible, ephemeral aspects of culture remind us how multidimensional and sensitive their lives were. The mystery of the curse of the pharaohs, although often explained rationally, is nevertheless firmly ingrained in the mass consciousness, demonstrating how ancient beliefs and fear of the unknown can influence the perception of events even in the modern era. This is a kind of reminder that the ancient Egyptians deeply believed in magic and the power of the word, and this belief permeated all aspects of their existence. The anomalous images that some associate with extraterrestrial contacts, while often finding logical explanations in the context of Egyptian art and symbolism, nevertheless make us reflect on the richness of their imagination and the complexity of their mythology. They show how differently ancient civilizations interpreted the world around them, inhabiting it with gods and beings whose forms could be as bizarre as they were deeply symbolic. Ultimately, all these mysteries highlight one important thing. Ancient Egypt is not a static image from the past, but a living, breathing organism that continues to unfold before us bit by bit. Every new discovery, every new research, yes, those that do not provide definitive answers only deepen our admiration for this amazing civilization. They serve as a constant reminder that human possibilities, both in ancient times and now, are limitless, and that history, which we consider well-studied, always contains untold chapters. The eternal veil of mystery that envelops Egypt does not repel but attracts, encouraging us to continue our search, ask questions, and strive for new discoveries that may one day allow us to look at this great civilization without a trace of the inexplicable. What do you think is the most fascinating of all the mysteries of ancient Egypt? And why does it attract you so much?